Of course, the Emperor understands the pain of a man rejected by his loved ones. However, Duke Ethan must make a decision before the problems in his family become even more serious. This man has spent his entire life guarding the misty seas in the south of the Empire, while the north is protected by other families. The Emperor will no longer be able to sit back and watch Ethan's family grow in strength. It's easy enough to understand his motives, but the Duke has no right to refuse a direct order. He was tasked with taking a daughter from a weak family as a wife, although Ethan had no intention of marrying at all. It doesn't matter who the bride is, because the Duke still won't be able to enjoy life in this marriage. I would like to believe that she will not run away in the first week, frightened by the eternal cold and fog. But the worst was yet to come when the Duke first saw his future legal wife. It's hard to believe, but the little girl is the very bride the Emperor spoke of. Now Ethan will definitely become famous as the trash Duke who wanted to marry a 5-year-old child. In her past life, Natsia was a commoner who couldn't even enter the magic tower. Eventually, she taught herself magic and, becoming the supreme mage, defeated the evil dragon. Only by uniting with allies did this become possible, although the girl was quite strong. However, life then became filled with grief and regret, eventually ending in a second reincarnation. Meanwhile, the court physician recommends boiling medicinal plants for the girl so that she can survive. If Natsia is destined to be the Baron's daughter, the servants must serve everything ready on a silver platter. The problem is that the Baroness refuses to treat the girl with expensive medications because there is simply not enough money for it. She insists that her husband is to blame for his maid's pregnancy and must bear personal responsibility. Natsia was given life in the body of the Baron's daughter, but her mother was an unknown servant. Because the mana around her heart remained at the level of a supreme mage, the child's body couldn't cope. Fearing that the girl's illness was too contagious, the Baroness forbade her to go outside. Gradually, the mana began to absorb the little heart, and Natsia's condition worsened every day. So she endured the pain for quite a long time, until one day she heard the news about her move to another house. It must be said that this woman could have gotten rid of her unwanted child, but she decided to do something a little different. She orders them to cover up the ugly scars and do everything as they agreed. Not understanding what is happening, the girl desperately tries to resist, believing that she is being led to her death. For some reason, the woman is convinced that the baby is deliberately coughing up blood, spreading the disease throughout the house. The maids were told to make sure that not a single drop of blood fell on the girl's clean dress. The main oddity is that Natsia sees in front of her a wedding dress that is very small. The Baroness declares that from today she becomes a bride and has no right to discuss her parents' decision. She is destined to marry Duke Ethan, and everything is ready for the ceremony to begin. This is how she first saw the man who was to become her legal husband. It is hard to believe, but the imperial family went further, discrediting the good name of their loyal vassal. Ethan demands to know what's going on here and why they brought this child instead of a bride. The knight asks him to forgive him, but the Duke himself accepted the Emperor's offer and has no right to refuse. Of course, no one knew that a child would be sent for the marriage, but the other women were already married. If Ethan sends the baby back to the estate, the bride will be branded a reject for the rest of her days. Looking at the Duke, Natsia suddenly realizes that this man is not an ugly old man at all. He asks for 1 minute to talk to the girl privately. Getting down on one knee, Ethan actually acts like he's about to propose. The scent coming from him was so familiar, as if Natsia had already met him in the past. It feels like he smells like the sea, and his thoughts seem to be carried away somewhere beyond the horizon. However, the pain from such an outcome of events cannot be compared even with the physical pain from absorbing mana. At some point, Natsia suddenly realizes that looking a grown man straight in the eyes is not so easy. Unable to contain her emotions, she abruptly pulls her hand away, although she should have been a little more polite. Of course, Ethan also goes through an incredible test, although he knows its outcome very well. A second later, the Duke declares his readiness to accept the girl into his family, giving her an official title. However, this will only be possible if Natsia agrees to become his adopted daughter. She heard correctly, he really did decide to adopt the baby, thus fulfilling the Emperor's decree. It is difficult to understand his intentions, but this decision clearly does not put an end to the feud with the Emperor. If she refuses, she will have to return to the Baron's house again, meeting his embittered wife. Until the baby's heart is completely stabilized, you just have to survive. Besides, staying here for a while will allow her to improve her mana management skills and heal herself. Having heard the Duke's proposal, Natsia loudly announces that she agrees to any of his proposals. Even if I have to work as a servant, it is much better than returning to pitch darkness. At that moment, she realizes that she should have spoken a little more calmly, then nothing would have happened. Almost immediately, the girl began to sink down. She could barely stand on her feet anyway. A little more and her story will end. Life next to the Duke gives her one last chance to survive. This is how Nadzia became the adopted daughter of the Guardian of the Sea. The next morning, she wakes up in an unfamiliar place, barely remembering the events of those last minutes. Of course, she had long since gotten used to her new body, but now life had changed even more. Instead of the pantry where the Baroness locked her, there is now plenty of space around her in a spacious room. Suddenly, loud voices are heard somewhere in the distance, and it seems they are demanding to call a doctor. However, one voice stands out from the rest. It belongs to a young girl. Greeting the young lady, Azelta wants to know if she slept well in her new room. From that moment on, the maid promises to serve her faithfully and truly, caring for her as if she were her own child. She asks to be addressed as a friend, without unnecessary formalities. It must be said that the furniture here is intended for adults, so it may be a little uncomfortable. When communicating with the maid, for some reason it seems to her that she can hear her thoughts. Azelta reports that the owner of the mansion has prepared a special gift for his daughter, which she will surely like. The Duke tried very hard to make sure that all the treats for the child were just as unusual. A huge lollipop appears in her hands, more like a shield with protective mana around it. The gift is indeed quite unusual, although eating this treat is not very convenient. Still, she had to pretend to be surprised, otherwise Natsia risked offending her father. Unfortunately, she again failed to control her emotions and immediately fell before the maid's eyes. Nazia had already promised herself that she would behave more calmly if she intended to survive until her mana was restored. The maid asks you to be patient for just a little while. A doctor will arrive in her room soon. In her past life, she almost never visited hospitals, preferring to make do with healing magic. Probably due to such a violent reaction to the candy, Mana began to behave extremely unstable again. The reason why the girl becomes ill is quite banal and lies in the weak child's body. However, if she calms down a little, then the mana will gradually return to the right direction. A minute later, she asks the maid not to worry, explaining her behavior as simple excitement in a new house. Azelta hears a male voice behind her. Fortunately, the family doctor arrived just in time. Hurriedly entering the room, Delfiro apologizes for being a little late in the hospital. If the young lady doesn't mind, he is ready to begin the diagnosis right now, while the symptoms have not yet appeared. Although the girl was small only in appearance, for some reason she became scared at the sight of the doctor. She understands that diagnostic methods in this world can be very different from what we are used to. Still, Dr. Delfiro was quite famous and could reveal useful information. Looking at the huge candy, the man also decided that the child had been given a shield on his first day. I had to explain that Dad decided to make an unusual gift, asking for help from a famous pastry chef. Thus, everything was ready for the examination procedure. Azelta asks you not to worry about anything. It doesn't hurt at all, you just need to wait a little. Incidentally, the Laveau family never informed the doctor about any problems concerning the girl's health. If he hadn't got anything wrong, Natsia was born with a body that was much weaker than normal. Delfiro wants to know the truth about whether her first family provided her with proper care. In any case, he promises to do everything possible so that the girl can soon live without pain in her heart. In response, she states that she is well enough to just have fun without bothering with treatment. It's hard to watch a small child bravely fight a serious illness. However, he again asks not to give up. His medical experience is quite sufficient to completely cure Natsia. There will be a more detailed examination in a few days, so she just needs to hold out for a while. Wherever she goes, Delfiro recommends taking Azelta with her so that she can provide assistance in time. With these words, he leaves the room. There are still several patients waiting for his visit. Now that the test is over, the girl suggests that her charge return to the Duke's gift. First, you need to arm yourself with a hammer, otherwise it really will be impossible to eat the candy. It's funny how Azelta handles this thing so easily, as if she used to work in a workshop. With one blow, she smashes the candy into pieces, putting on a little show for the little girl. In this form, it looks more like lollipops, although it was much more interesting to watch the work with a hammer. Nadia understands that her maid was a good person. She sincerely cares about the sick child. At the same time, various thoughts are running through the maid's head, but some of them are not entirely clear. For example, she rejoices in the fact that the ducal house cannot do without her help while the child is sick. Although Del Firo was taken with the young lady on his first visit, the girl tries to remain vigilant. Hearing her thoughts, Nadia decides to treat the maid to some sweets while her father is not in the room. She promises that it will remain a secret, but the girl simply has to share her sweets. It must be said that the girl's request sounds somehow special, as if she treats the maid like her own sister. The little girl is sure that in the entire estate it is impossible to find a better maid than sweet Azelta. Such words would touch anyone's heart, even though she had to look after other people's children before. Having thanked him for the treat, the girl assures that this is the most unusual gift of all that she has seen. I wonder how long it will take a child to finish this lollipop. Unfortunately, the problem still persists, and the weak stomach cannot withstand the treat. The maid suggests leaving the candy for another time and eating some delicious porridge instead. Realizing that the child was being poorly fed in the house, Azelta's anger at the Lavos' family flared up even more. The next day, an urgent letter from the Laveau family arrives at the Duke's estate. Since the squad Ethan had recently sent out had not returned, they were left with only one option. The servant reports that several mutilated corpses were found in the forest several days ago. This detachment was probably sent by the Laveau family, although their fighters were not known for their good skills. In the letter, they suggest planning the marriage in advance if everything is okay with the bride. Such insolence is hard to tolerate, but now the Duke must control himself. It's enough that these non-humans sent a 5-year-old child to get married. But now the Baroness expects that Ethan is ready to seriously consider this party as his legal wife. He decides to write a response on his own behalf, not wanting to play silly games. As long as the girl bears the ducal name, they will certainly not be able to harm her. Nadia has already become a member of the Duke's family as his daughter, so what are they missing? Of course, if civil strife arises as a result of the deception, they will be able to pay back for the insult to honor. However, the Duke still does not understand at what point the idea of adopting the girl occurred to him. It felt as if he had already met Nadia in his deep childhood and had forever remembered her appearance. Is he really able to see in her what is hidden from the eyes of all other people? His thoughts are interrupted by the family doctor, who comes to the office on the orders of the Duke himself. Today, Del Firo was preparing for a detailed inspection, and he probably has news. In response, the doctor apologizes for not reporting this earlier, but the process took longer than usual. It seemed to him that the girl's heart was so much smaller than normal that studying it would be very problematic. By the way, some servants received candies which used to be that very shield. Everyone wanted to receive sweets personally from the hands of the young lady. The servants even began to line up. However, when a lot of people crowded around her, the girl became a little nervous. As it turned out, what frightened her most was the shadow of a tall adult. Apparently, the time Nadia spent at the Baron's estate was a much more difficult test. It's scary to imagine how they abused her, bringing the little girl to such a state. From that day on, the Duke decides to convince his daughter that she no longer has any reason to worry. Her room had changed beyond recognition in the last few days. Ethan had been very kind to Nadia. True, the doctor will never be able to understand that all health problems are related to mana. If this were a past life, Nadia would gladly help a person in such need. This time, we cannot allow an ending full of regrets, because fate can have a happy continuation. By the way, the people in this estate are much better than all the masters and servants in the previous house. The next morning, she meets a younger servant named Belle for the first time. The girl can easily clean the room while the baby lies in bed for a little while longer. After waiting until she turns away, Nadia decides to take advantage of the opportunity. She deftly jumps out of bed, arranging everything as if she had covered herself with a thick blanket. The most opportune time has come to explore the territory where she will live. There were so many rooms everywhere that soon it would be necessary to draw up a detailed plan of the ducal estate. She has plenty of time for this. The main thing is not to give away her real age. 10 minutes later, she manages to get out of the mansion, finding herself near the forest. The places here are mesmerizing. You can admire their beauty for a long time. But if you stand like this all day, the only good chance will be missed. Understanding this, Nadia tries to take a step forward, discovering something that can truly surprise. The fog of mana completely envelops the area. It can be felt with every new breath. If this fog is so thick, then the plants in the forest would be equally special. Since Natsia wanted to find a place to collect rare magical herbs, that place was right here. Even the sand was filled with mana. It could be used as material for magic stones. It is amazing that such rare treasures are simply scattered across the earth. At that moment, an interesting idea comes to her mind. She just needs to pull herself together and gather up her courage. There's not a single soul around her right now, so why not take advantage of this chance? Extending her hand, she decides to simply use the mana from the mist, replacing her own. The child's body is not yet strong enough to control mana, but the fog easily compensates for this deficiency. The easiest way would be to use an invisibility spell to safely explore the area. Thus, Natsia decides to go to where the mana fog was even thicker and more powerful. Once on the shore of the lake, she notices a mollusk that is susceptible to the influence of mana. The main question is how this creature managed to grow to such an incredible size. If she sees his muscles in front of her, it turns out that they have dried out so much that they are even fit for the table. It feels like the girl didn't end up here by chance and someone had prepared her visit in advance. The first attempt at searching immediately ends in success. All the necessary herbs are here. Perhaps it was all a matter of excessive enthusiasm, but even Natsia's heart felt a little lighter. From that day on, she decides to set up a secret hideout here, where she will prepare magical elixirs. Suddenly, the sky above starts to behave strangely, but it's not the sky at all. For the first few seconds after closing the sink, the girl is unable to understand what is going on. If she's not mistaken, she's now become the unsuspecting victim of this mollusk. First, she just needs to calm down and figure out how to get out of the trap now. However, a moment later, she suddenly sees a strange glowing ball, as if calling the girl to itself. Usually, victims are treated differently, which means someone is trying to be friendly. Taking a closer look at it, Natsia sees no signs of a spell being cast by anyone. The ball formed itself using the ordinary laws of nature. She understands that the journey is just beginning, and giving up at the beginning is simply stupid. Using the mana she absorbed from the forest fog, Natsia gets to work. It took no more than 5 minutes to create a magical seal right inside the mollusk. The shell is excellent for the foundation of a seal that activates detection magic. Now she will immediately understand if someone is close to the shore of the lake. Perhaps this little ball could help if it didn't dodge like a tiny fly. It would be interesting to touch it and understand what kind of mana this glow consists of. Suddenly, Natsia hears loud voices of people coming from somewhere outside the shell. Some of them suggest breaking it right away, otherwise the girl might just suffocate. A minute later, she sees the face of the young girl who promised to always be there. Without wasting any time, Azelta takes the child in her arms, demanding that they be immediately escorted into the house. In less than an hour, they had already reached the estate, where Natsia would be completely safe. The crush around her was even more of a surprise than the closing of the clamshell. The maid explains that this mollusk was of abnormal size due to the absorption of a strange fog. The girl cannot even imagine how much the servants and Duke Ethan worried about her. You shouldn't get too close to such creatures, and especially don't play carelessly inside the shells. In Natsia's past life, she was constantly thrown into the thick of things, so she was not at all accustomed to being cared for. Nobody thought about her life. Besides, this maid simply has nothing to take from an adopted child. After hearing all the warnings, she asks directly what makes Azelta show such concern. The question was rather naive, considering how the sweet creature spoke about it. It's as if she doesn't understand that adults are obligated to take care of children, even if it doesn't bring any benefits. Moreover, just recently the girl gave her something very beautiful, doing it from the bottom of her heart. So now she is obliged to serve the young lady, without wanting to receive gifts in return. This candy really does work wonders if it can connect people's hearts so easily. She decides to share the treat with even more people, so that they too will become closer to her. Right now the girl needs to rest. Azelta asks to go to bed without delaying for conversation. However, this is strange, because the girl definitely used an invisibility spell when entering the forest. In that case, how did they manage to find the little lady in the shell so quickly? The answer to this question will reveal many secrets, but for now it is important to maintain normal behavior. The next morning, she decides to find out something. Only the maid can help with this. But before she could even begin the conversation, someone appeared in the room who would play a significant role in her new life. The girl loudly asks him to come in. This man is tasked with ensuring Natsia's safety. It's okay if the bodyguard seems too gloomy to the girl at first. However, it is worth getting to know him first, considering that he was hired by Natsia's father. Finally, the first bodyguard in her life enters the room with such height, he clearly did not make a mistake in choosing a profession. The young man was so tall that looking at him from below could cause a neck ache. Edmund greets the young lady and her assistant, promising to carry out any order Natsia gives. This man is the bearer of the Mystic Eye and has quite strong mana. The Mystic Eye allows the owner to see the intangible mana hidden from most mages. Moreover, it is the purest mystical eye she has ever seen. If you try really hard, you can read the bodyguard's memories, understanding his backstory. As expected, the invisibility spell has no effect on someone protected by such mana. That is why, upon learning of the child's disappearance, the Duke was able to find her so quickly far from home. Next to him, the invisibility spell feels like a simple, useless toy. She asks for forgiveness, but she was a little distracted by his shining eyes. The lady assures that Edmund's eyes are as brilliant and beautiful as the finest diamonds. In truth, he had a slightly different opinion of the child, considering the girl shy and modest. Besides, it's a bit weird to say something like that at the first meeting, just after telling the person your name. However, this does not change anything, and, bending his knee, the knight takes a solemn oath. He promises to protect the young lady from all dangers, even if his life is at stake. Edmund gives his word that he will dedicate his body and soul to serving in this house. She will be under reliable protection. Well, at least the good news is that the girl is not at all frightened by Sir Edmund's eyes. All this time, the second maid stands patiently near the door, hoping to hear the whole conversation. Azelta's last words make her wonder, is there really anyone who doesn't like mystic eyes? She still has a lot to understand, because the local townspeople have every reason for this attitude. After the latest incident with the murder of an influential lady, the attitude towards Edmund changed. Many are convinced that a man with such a frightening look took part in the crime. Besides, he and Madame had not gotten along well before, and every new quarrel brought the day of reprisal closer. Rumor has it that he eventually got to her, doing something that now makes him an outcast. Soon, Edmund meets his younger brother, hearing his clear, childish voice. Even from afar, the boy noticed his brother standing in the middle of the room, as if thinking about something important. Having come to his senses a little, he asks not to worry, this concerns ordinary work matters. Frey just wanted to ask for time off to go outside, if his older brother didn't object. However, right now the fog outside was too thick, it had never happened before. Of course, he cannot forbid the boy to go for a walk, but he promises to keep a close eye on him from afar. Edmund is willing to let Frey go only if he promises not to stray far from home. By the way, Frey managed to notice that his older brother's mood had changed dramatically. Surely someone took a liking to his cute face, because girls often glance at Edmund. Suddenly he confesses to the boy that for some reason one person really liked his eyes. It was precisely the eyes that were being talked about, otherwise he would not have seriously considered this. Realizing that this is not a joke, Frey asks if he knows this mysterious person. Surprisingly, the very same lady who had recently arrived at Duke Ethan's estate was that very person. She said his eyes were as bright as two of the finest diamonds. Edmund had no reason to deceive his younger brother, but his words did not fit in his head. Thus, after meeting his personal guard, he began to stay close to Natsia. She wanted to see his lovely eyes more often, but he still tried to remain unnoticed. In turn, the girl also diligently pretended that he was succeeding. And yet, that incident with the closed sink left behind too many questions. The arriving group was able to open it almost immediately with brute force, even though the mollusk was truly enormous. It's hard to remember if Nadia managed to remove the magical seal she created on the shore of the lake. In case they found her, the girl would simply say that she had nothing to do with her. Returning to the room, the maid offers to read a book if the lady wishes. In response, she asks to get some interesting book with lots of pictures. She hopes that she won't look for a boring book about climate, nature, or something like that. Naturally, they bring her a children's book about a fairy and a boar, hoping that she likes fairy tales. It's good that she learned to read a long time ago and she won't have to listen to a fairy tale being read. Suddenly she realizes that the book is far from boring, as she initially thought. It contains a lot of useful information about the Emperor, presented in the form of a children's fairy tale. For example, the author tells how Emperor Million imposed a ban on the use of magic. It turned out that the imperial family caught every violator whose magic was the most dangerous. All captured magicians are immediately eliminated and will most likely be executed like other criminals. It's amazing how easily the terrible truth is presented, told in simple words. Wizards are indeed executed simply for being skilled in using magic. In other words, if Natsia had been caught with the magic seal, she would have suffered the same fate. Right now, the magic circle might still be inside the clam, and yet only Natsia was in that place. Noticing the young lady's agitation, the maid suggests taking any other book. Suddenly, she asks to finish reading, citing extreme fatigue. Usually, immediately after the girl falls asleep, both maids quickly leave the chambers. This will give her the opportunity to escape using her usual invisibility magic. There is only one person in the house who is not affected by this kind of magic at all. It's too late to abandon the plan now, otherwise the Inquisitors might come to their house in the morning. When the moment is right, she uses her own mana to activate the magic. After a few more seconds, the girl seemed to dissolve into thin air, becoming completely invisible. After this, it becomes easier for her to cover distances while in zero gravity. The journey to the lake would take forever, but with the help of magic it takes only a few minutes. Using flight and invisibility at the same time is still quite difficult. But if you do everything very quickly, she will have a chance to hold out until the case is fully completed. Plucking up her courage, Natsia throws herself down, feeling her body become lighter than air. If the seal has already been discovered, it will take a long time to explain that it simply flew past. However, the main surprise is not the seal or the open clamshell. The girl couldn't even imagine that all this time someone had guessed about her travels. It was as if this man knew in advance that if he stayed here, he would certainly find Natsia. It is none other than Duke Ethan who silently watches his daughter's reaction. It's hard to understand what made the father stay in the shell and why he decided to follow her. Ethan knows very well that Natsia was found in this place, near the Sea of Misty. Apparently, something really interested the girl, since she returned to the same place again. That day, the Duke decided not to ask unnecessary questions, fearing that she would be afraid of punishment. He still remembers that day when his brothers smiled widely, even though he always hated Ethan. The brother claimed that his favorite sword was safely hidden in a clamshell on the shore of the lake. But once inside, the shell suddenly closed, just as it had happened to Natsia. One can imagine how scared the boy was when he found himself there all alone. It was only that day that he realized why his brother had sent him there and why his friends had laughed at Ethan. It's safe to say that Ethan himself didn't find it funny at all. He called loudly for help, although he understood that it was completely useless. They didn't care whether Ethan survived or not, and the fog was much thicker than it was today. Natsia was relatively safe compared to what the boy had to endure. All this time, both of them simply watched each other without uttering a single word. But if Natsia doesn't take the first step, it will be difficult for her to find an excuse for her visit later. The girl silently climbs onto the shell, hiding her magical abilities from her father. She tries to pretend that every such ascent is incredibly difficult for her. At this moment, she realizes that the Duke's reactions are not at all what she expected. He may have the same ability to resist magic as her bodyguard. In other words, he can easily spot the girl anywhere, even if she uses invisibility magic. In a past life, only those who had fully mastered the art of the sword could feel such magic. Apparently, Ethan developed his abilities even further, becoming a top-tier sword master. The Duke wants to know how long his daughter has been visiting the shore of this lake, far from the mansion. In addition, it should be explained why the girl brought sand with her from the edge of the forest. Along with the sand, she grabbed some dried grass shoots, as if preparing for a ritual. She answers all questions the same way, assuring that she really enjoys collecting plants. Suddenly she realizes that the questions were a simple formality, but the main interest was elsewhere. Having abandoned his questions, he suddenly begins to peer intently into the distance of the forest. High in the mountains, the fog becomes thicker, although recently the air was almost clear. This fact makes her think too. Natsia knows very well what the fog here is. Soon it may swallow up the mansion, and all the monsters living beyond the sea will gather in one place. The Duke won't object to her coming here unannounced if she wants to create a hideout. Simply put, this entire place can belong only to her if the girl so wishes. However, she understands that she is useless to Ethan, which means the privileges were unnecessary. Natsia asks directly why Ethan accepted her into his family, giving her the ducal title. The question was indeed too direct. The man was not ready for such adult questions. The thing is, Ethan has an older brother who considered him a threat and bullied the boy. Trapped, he came to the simple realization that no one was on his side. After an incident on the shore, he begins to build up his strength on his own, eventually becoming his father's main heir. All his life he had been surrounded by emptiness and darkness, but when he met Nadia, Ethan felt that he could help her. On the first day of the meeting, he thought that they could get a good opportunity that would be beneficial for both of them. Someday Nadia will be able to return to the Baron's family and take revenge for all the suffering and humiliation. It's hard to say whether you should say such things to a 5-year-old, but it was the honest truth. As he leaves, he asks the girl not to stay too long, otherwise they will look for her again. He probably knows nothing about magic at all, since he didn't say a single word about it. A completely logical conclusion, since magic in these lands is strictly prohibited and is a crime. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Nadia felt lightness in her soul. From then on, Edmund began to visit the young lady more often, not allowing the girl to walk alone. She did not order personal transport in the form of a bodyguard and could easily have walked. However, if you can admire his beautiful eyes so closely, you can endure it a little. Edmund explains that her health has not yet recovered, so there is no need to bother. In response, Nadia asks not to tell her father that she is running away, otherwise Edmund will lose her trust. It sounds like a simple childish threat, although it's better not to test the truth of her words. The man agrees to this condition, promising to report to the Duke that they were simply walking together. In this case, the agreement should be reinforced so that he does not think of breaking his promise. He seems to be too far removed from childish games and is not accustomed to making an oath in this way. However, Edmund then takes a solemn knight's oath to keep her secret forever. This looks much more convincing, noticeably lifting the little lady's spirits. Some people on the estate didn't need to be reported to know about the violation of the rules. Returning back, the girl had to listen for a long time to Delfiro's comments about her walks. Surprisingly, listening to their instructions even becomes pleasant, considering the events of a past life. Before, no one cared what happened to her, but now every member of the family cares about the girl. The next morning, the one who changed her life forever appears in the children's room again. Apparently, she was having nightmares. The baby was tossing and turning and was quite tense. He throws her a small bag, hoping to calm Nadia down a little. Looking at his adopted daughter, a whole swarm of conflicting thoughts flashed through the Duke's head. For the first time since their first meeting, he sees her so close. He understands that until she herself feels safe, he shouldn't approach her. In the past, his character was quite similar. Ethan also avoided the people around him. Thorns that are still too small can only harm themselves and are not capable of responding. Only when Nadia fully realizes that they are allies will it be time to talk. And now it is only necessary to occasionally show her that the girl is not at all alone in the estate. On the way to the office, the Duke suddenly announces that he would like to make a doll. If possible, he asks to make the hedgehog after he personally approves the sketch. In response, the assistant promises to organize everything and bring the sketches by tomorrow evening. Hedgehogs must have lived in the interior, but the Duke had never seen one in the wild. Waking up, the girl suddenly realizes that she hasn't woken up for a minute for 2 days. She looks so tired that Azelta didn't dare wake her up. During this time, the fog has moved towards the sea, so now there is a lot of sun outside. You should try to get up at least now to get as much sunlight as possible. Not far from the bed, Nadia notices a tray that was clearly left there for her. The maid reports that the Duke left something on this tray, especially for the young lady. He said he regretted visiting her room without permission and therefore prepared the gift himself. It turns out that Ethan decided to spend his work time just to make the girl happy a little. I must say, it worked. She was really happy with such a funny gift. A simple apology would have sufficed, but he wanted to prepare a surprise. Noticing her thoughtfulness, the maid asks to tell her what has so confused my lady. Strangely enough, her mood actually changed, as if she was planning to use her gift somehow. If this is true, Azelta wishes to be the first to know about this cunning plan. At the same moment, the servant loudly announces the arrival of the family doctor. But right now, the little lady has decided to put on a big show, so Delfiro will have to wait. She creates a beautiful amulet with her own hands from plants and shells given to her by the Duke. In this form, his gift looks even more beautiful. You can even wear it as a real decoration. It really did turn out very beautiful, but the doctor asks me to put my handicrafts aside during the examination. As expected, the knight continues to follow her, doing so more and more unnoticed by his charge. After a boring examination at the doctor's, she intends to show her work to her dad as soon as possible. At some point, Nausea seems to forget that childhood fun should remain in the distant past. Suddenly, she runs into the man Ethan had just been talking about. There is no point in showing the decoration to anyone in this state. All the girl's efforts have gone down the drain. However, what is more important is why this stranger stood so rudely in the middle of the corridor. The smell of his mana is so strong, as if she sees the most powerful mage in front of her. Besides, he looks so much like Ethan. It's as if a mold had been made of the Duke's face. Looking at the girl, Cassian says that he has long wanted to see his new niece. However, before visiting other people's homes, you should ask their owner's permission, right? Ethan warns that the young lady looks unhappy and that he should not stay in the mansion. In response, he continues to claim that he wanted to leave a good impression. There is no need to be angry with your brother who came to visit for the first time in many years. His words sound too ridiculous, because it's easy to guess that no one is happy to see this man here. The Duke orders the knight to keep his sword at the ready, knowing full well how vile his brother can be. He is only allowed to visit the mansion during special family events, but today there are none. Cassian disagrees that having a new family member isn't such an event, meaning he didn't break the rules. He behaves so carelessly in the Duke's house that he risks getting into trouble. Even the girl's gift to her father is considered by him to be ordinary trash scattered on the floor. Ethan is always busy, and Nausea doesn't even have friends, so it turns out he can replace her friend. Unable to listen to this nonsense, she reminds him that she has plenty of friends. The three who stand behind her are her best friends, whom she does not intend to change. For some reason, the man is sure that these things behind her back can never become friends. She is still too young to understand this, so it is better to listen to the advice of her elders. Realizing that he was calling people things, Nausea thanks Cassian for introducing himself. Now her friends must follow the lady, leaving one unnecessary thing alone. No one expected such a bold reaction, but it was impossible to disobey the young lady. Even Ethan was surprised by how cleverly his little adopted daughter played with words. For a long time, Cassian does not move from the spot, thinking over every word of the girl. True, he should not act like the owner while the real owner is around. The Duke reminds that the exile has only 24 hours to visit the mansion. But judging by his brother's expression, right now he's only interested in Nausea's last words. Cassian clearly understands that the phrase about an unnecessary thing was thrown at him by the girl. For a 5-year-old, she is too sharp and can cut with words like a sharp knife. The close servants already understand that 5 minutes ago, the young lady made a powerful enemy for herself. However, she herself would very much like to have another meeting with the scoundrel. She never managed to give her dad the amulet that she had so painstakingly created with her own hands. The maid reminds her that the pillow is made of the best cotton, so the girl is in no danger. Still, there were some phrases addressed to Cassian that were better left unheard. It turned out that the lady was not only witty, but also a very brave girl. If her father hadn't been downstairs, she would have gone to see his ignorant brother right now. Right now, it would be better for her to rest, although for this, she should bring a new pillow into the room. In the heat of anger, she finally notices Azelta, who wants to tell her something. The maid is forced to say that the young lady looks very angry. It does not suit her beautiful face. It's better not to look in the direction of the hammer, otherwise your thoughts will lead in a completely different direction. Suddenly, the maid offers to do it a little later and is even ready to carry out the order personally. This man has been irritating her for a long time, and now there is an excellent reason to use a hammer. But what's more important is that the girl recently asked me to cook something tasty. It will calm her nerves. Dessert is already served, which means we can forget about the hammer and Cassian's head for a while. However, the girl eats this porridge every day. Couldn't they find something tastier? Azelta asks to move the porridge aside because the dessert is next to the plate. And indeed, next to the main course, she sees a beautiful box of treats. These cookies are made especially for my lady. They are very light and will not harm the stomach. She puts one cookie in her mouth and only hopes that the dessert doesn't come back out. For the first time in a long time, Nausea eats something sweet and the food stays in her stomach. She admits that after eating the treat, she began to feel much better. Finally, the girl warns that a heart filled with anger always harms its owner. In return, she promises to carry only pure intentions in her heart, without remembering the bad. However, it is better to leave the hammer in the same place. This thing will still be useful to the girl. Thanks to Azelta, her mood really does change, and perhaps she will sleep very soundly. Just a few minutes later, Nadia hears a strange rustling sound somewhere near the window. At some point, the rustling becomes so loud that drowsiness instantly disappears. Usually the maid closes the curtains, but now they seem to open by themselves. Suddenly, she sees the same gentleman who had started a quarrel with her dad near the window. It's hard to understand what he wants and how he dared to show up in her room in the middle of the night. As is usual in such cases, the girl decides to pretend that she doesn't notice Cassian's presence. He warns that if she doesn't open the door, he will fall out of the window and Ethan will be declared his brother's killer. Besides, she would hardly be able to sleep knowing that a guest was waiting for her outside. It is clear that this impudent fellow is not going to give up so easily and may carry out some of his threats. Of course, no one wants to get out of bed, but in this case there is simply no other choice. Slowly approaching the window, the girl still doubts whether she should follow the scoundrel's lead. However, she is still not in danger, because Edmund will burst into the room at any moment. Having thanked her for her trust, the man asks his niece to simply accept a small gift. Throwing the crystal, he assures her that this thing will definitely be useful to her someday. Besides, all shiny things are charming and any lady is delighted with them. If she accepts his gift, the man no longer needs to stay in the room and disturb the baby. The truth is that she did not agree to accept this gift, and he did not even ask permission. The gifted crystal is a mana stone, and one with an unnaturally compressed power inside. In a past life, these stones were so unstable that they were simply thrown away. The crystals could explode from the light touch of a mana-emitting mage. She decides not to touch the stone, instructing Azelta to throw it away with the rest of the trash. But the main question was why Cassian needed to give her such strange gifts. In fact, she had only recently been in a better mood, and then this scoundrel came along. The next morning, Nadia tells the maid about the night visit, showing Cassian's strange gift. Of course, this takes the girl by surprise, because it was also her fault that the person entered the room. The lady demands that the crystal be disposed of immediately before she picks up the hammer again. He threatened her that he would do something very strange if the girl refused to open the window. Hearing these words, the maid hugs her tightly to her chest, understanding what the little girl had to endure. I must say, she did not expect such a reaction at all, because this man is not that dangerous. After all, the room is under 24-hour security, and all she needs to do is call out loud for help. Azelta decides to tell the truth that His Majesty possesses incredible power. Therefore, in the future, she will have to become just as strong to be able to defend herself on her own. But this will only happen in the future, and for now she should not open up to anyone, even if she hears threats. If Cassian were truly a threat, Duke Ethan would have put an end to it long ago. He won't be able to defeat such a strong opponent, and is only capable of doing minor mischief. Nadia didn't expect the maid to worry about her so much. Taking her hands, the girl promises that she will henceforth behave carefully, fulfilling her covenant. In response, she asks to wait 1 minute until she returns from her room. Having said these words, the girl heads for the exit, as if she had prepared some kind of surprise in advance. In truth, such an unexpected departure from the room is in itself a surprise for Nadia. However, instead of a maid, she is replaced by a guard who clearly did not expect to meet a lady. She asks not to worry about anything. She knows perfectly well that Edmund is following her. From today on, he promises to guard not only the door, but also the area near the window. He can be anywhere, and if necessary, will climb a tree opposite the windows. Edmund asks for only one thing, after which he is ready to immediately fulfill his promises. The guard is obliged to ask permission for personal protection, otherwise such surveillance will be illegal. Azelta reminds that this permission means 24-hour surveillance of the room. This will entail some restrictions, because now she will not be able to cast spells with a bodyguard. If she is uncomfortable seeing Edmund, he can easily be replaced with another knight. However, the girl had long since gotten used to this man, so she decided to choose him. It's time to throw away the dark memories of the past and start a new life. Even if Edmund seemed suspicious to her at first, that doesn't mean he's a threat. That same day, Belle offers to tell her a little about Cassian if my lady is interested. It turned out that Mr. Ethan's brother had been exiled from his own family, so it was best not to approach him. At this moment, she realizes that she said too much in an attempt to please the young lady. She quickly apologizes, but the rest of the estate's servants have been waiting for her in the kitchen for a long time. It's strange that the girl suddenly stopped talking about this man, as if she was afraid of something. The atmosphere in the room seems to have changed. This is not exactly a good time for reconnaissance. We need to choose a more appropriate moment to ask the maid some questions. Sooner or later, she will gather all the necessary information about Cassian and his secret past. Another oddity is the replacement of Edmund, as another knight takes over the service in his place. The girl decides to ask Hanas who this Cassian is and why there are so many rumors around his name. Ominous things are constantly happening to him, like the time when all the plants nearby dried up. According to the guard, it turns out that the fog and herbs in these lands have magical properties. Hannes heard that since childhood this gentleman was a rather nimble boy and could easily climb into a window. In that case, he should have used his talent in some other way, for example, becoming a ducal knight. Soon, Ethan demands to know everything about the night break-in. Of course, the responsibility for the incident lies entirely with the guards. Edmund had orders to protect the lady with his own life, but in the end, he made an unforgivable mistake. Nadia asks her father not to be angry, believing that he is not to blame for the incident. This time it would be fair if he avoided reprimands and severe punishments. After thinking about her request for a moment, Ethan asks her to answer why she is so concerned about Cassian's fate. Apparently, she is specifically looking for people to find out all the information about him. However, she doesn't have to worry about anything as long as her dad is able to provide protection. He tries his best to protect the girl from danger, but Nadia must not let her guard down. The Duke believes that yesterday's incident was a perfect example of her courage and resilience. By the way, the Duke also demonstrates fortitude, although it is time to finally let the child go. At that moment, he hears an urgent message troops have already been sent to the Sea of Fog. They'll have to put the conversation on hold for a while, but they'll be able to resume communication in the evening. Nadia asks to stay for just a few minutes, otherwise work matters may drag on for a long time. As a parting gift, the girl wants to give the same crown that she was unable to give yesterday evening. She made it with her own hands, but it fell apart because of the scoundrel Cassian. It was a pity that it was so small that it got stuck on the top of the Duke's head. However, the point is not the beauty of the decoration, but who gave him this crown. Ethan thanks his daughter for the wonderful gift. He hasn't seen a more elegant piece of jewelry in a long time. The main thing is that for the first time in a long time, Dad actually smiled at her. It must be admitted that, if only for the sake of his smile, it was worth starting this story with the gift of jewelry. After some time, she shares the good news with her friends her father really did like the crown. In response, the maid assures that she had no doubt about the success of the matter and that she herself wears it with pleasure. You need to think about who else you should give jewelry to in order to make the person happier. At this moment, the chief knight's assistant appears from behind, wanting to tell the news. The Duke has issued a new order. It concerns Edmund personally and his closest subordinates. Unfortunately, right now he is forced to leave the estate and go to the Diaz family. At the same time, Ethan ordered that the stone be placed near the estate and that this be done as quickly as possible. When hearing about the stone for the first time, some people don't immediately understand what it's all about. This shouldn't have happened on the first day of personal protection, but Edmund is not to blame for anything. He promises to return to his duties as soon as he returns from the Diaz estate. Something very important must have happened for Ethan to order this. However, this will not take much time, no more than 2 days. Having bowed to the young lady, the guard quickly retreats to the Duke's office. It remains to be seen why there was such a rush and what stone Edmund's assistant was talking about. Azelta had heard that a certain magic stone could disperse fog when it became thick. Most likely this was being done for a young gentleman with whom Natsia was the same age. It turned out that Sir Edmund had a younger brother who looked very much like Edmund himself. This child has been very ill since birth, and the thick fog only makes the symptoms worse. After hearing the story, the girl immediately decides to help him. Moreover, right now she has only one amulet left at her disposal that is capable of performing a miracle. At least she wants to try to give this crown to a boy who needs help. She would need to ask the Duke's permission if she was serious about meeting him. Hearing the request, Ethan does not understand why his daughter needed to go to the Diaz estate. At this time, ferocious monsters roam everywhere, and in addition, soon everything will be swallowed by fog. Nausea insists on her own, because she will only be on the trip for a short time and then return back. After the gift is given to the sick boy, she promises to go home immediately. Having made concessions, Ethan warns that any movement is only possible with a detachment of soldiers. In addition, she should get the consent of the family doctor. Only after that the father will agree. However, he agreed faster than Natsia expected, and all the conditions would be easy to fulfill. Getting Delfiro's permission is quite easy, and she has long been accustomed to walking with the knights. After thanking her father, the girl asks to send a letter to the Diaz family about her imminent arrival. Ethan had never refused his daughter anything, but she acted as if she was trying to persuade him. He understands that he needs to give the girl a little more time so that she can fully open up. Besides, for some reason she promised to return to the estate immediately after giving her gift. Even after all this time, Nadia continues to address Ethan by his formal title. At some point, he decides to do things differently, ordering her words to be conveyed through a knight. After all, there is nothing wrong with a close relative deciding to visit the family. Even if she is an adopted daughter, it does not make the girl less important. At the same time, Natsia is preparing to fulfill her father's final condition, having secured the doctor's consent. Even before completing the examination, Delfiro realizes that health problems still remain. He is forced to admit that my lady's heartbeat is still too unstable. Without listening to boring assurances, she asks not to continue, otherwise she will not be able to give the gift. However, her stamina may not be enough to travel to the neighboring lands of the Diaz family. Well, the only thing left to do is to give the doctor a small bribe if there is no other way to resolve the issue. She promises to fulfill any wish if the doctor agrees to tell the Duke that she is completely healthy. It is difficult to go against the wishes of a child, even though he will commit a crime. He agrees to accept this beautiful necklace, but nothing can change his decision. And yet, for one trip, he is ready to give written consent if she returns immediately. If Nadia becomes ill during the hike, she must report it immediately and not make a secret of it. Finally, her plan came true, although she had to listen to the lectures of a boring doctor to get it. Some time later, a letter with a short description of the patient's condition was already lying in the Duke's office. In the letter, the doctor admits that the girl's health remains at a very low level. Thus, even a short hike can become a serious test for her weak body. If Ethan follows the doctor's advice, it will negatively affect his relationship with his daughter. But by doing otherwise, he takes all the risks upon himself, because the doctor officially refused the girl permission to travel. Sometimes in life you have to make difficult choices when your heart tells you to do the wrong thing. As expected, very soon my lady was ready for the campaign to the neighboring lands, standing opposite the Duke's carriage. It must be said that the carriage is truly very beautiful, as if the Emperor himself were riding in it. The journey will take about 3 hours, during which time she will be able to rest or look outside. If the girl gets tired, Azelta advises simply lying down on the sofa. This furniture will allow her to relax. It felt like she was in a bedroom on wheels. Everything was so comfortably arranged. A second later, she opens her eyes, realizing that someone has carefully covered the girl with a blanket. It turned out that she was really very tired, since she fell asleep right after the start of the trip. They could well have woken her up, because she didn't even have time to look out the window of this luxurious carriage. It turns out she slept through the most interesting part, but the carriage had already delivered them to the Diaz family lands. The maid assures them that there will be something to see once they get to the estate. Upon arrival, the girl is already met by her bodyguard, hoping that the trip went without incident. While he's giving his standard speech, Natsia notices how strongly the room smells of pharmaceuticals. At this moment, the doctor reports an important patient who needs help. Edmund should also go into his room for a while, changing into his knightly uniform. However, she asks not to do this, because after presenting the gift, she intends to leave the estate immediately. Nazia had already heard that his younger brother was the same age, so they could become friends in the future. She promises to come again as soon as he feels better, and to leave a little surprise today. Meanwhile, the servants had already prepared refreshments for the young lady and her retinue. The girl wants to know what happened to Edmund's brother and why the boy became ill. Suddenly she feels mana erupting from somewhere far away. There's clearly magical energy behind the door, which means Edmund is hiding something. He bitterly admits that his younger brother suffered from headaches and heart pains from birth. Bursting into the room, the doctor demands to know how long ago Frey started having seizures again. His unexpected visit startled the young lady a little, but he arrived just in time. Only next time the maid asks to enter a little more quietly, otherwise everyone will start having fits. Besides, you shouldn't discuss the illness in the girl's presence. She's very worried about Frey. Realizing that they are constantly hiding something from her, Natsia demands that they tell her everything immediately. They communicate with each other without any formalities, so why do they make an exception just for her? Delfiro apologizes, but they are the same age and can therefore allow such communication. Sometimes adults say things that are not allowed to be said in the presence of children. Only now does Nadia learn that all of them, including Dr. Delfiro, were the same age. Azelta adds that this guy is younger than each of them, since he was born only in December. This was actually pretty good news, considering she thought Delfiro was an old man. Constant overwork has taken a toll on poor Delfiro's appearance. However, the feeling of strong mana that was seeping through the door still doesn't leave Natsia. The girl asks not to accompany her because she just needs to go to the toilet. This even applies to Azelta. She can handle it quite well without the help of a personal maid. The strange thing is that the little girl doesn't even know where the toilet is in this huge house. Listening to Milady's footsteps, Edmund realizes that she is heading to his brother's room. Meanwhile, she tries her best to remain unnoticed, but her secret has already been revealed. A few minutes later, Natsia finds herself in front of a heavy door that hides the mana behind it. It would be foolish if she didn't find out everything about the source of such a strong, magical emission. Opening the door, she notices a boy emitting powerful bursts of magical energy. There is no doubt that he is the only source of this strange mana. At first, it's a bit scary to watch him. He really does look very sick. As Natsia expected, he had to endure a lot due to severe pain in his heart. The girl understands him like no one else, because she herself suffers from a similar disease. It soon becomes clear that in such a weak state, Frey is unable to communicate. The affliction is caused by mana flows wrapping around the body, manifesting before the full release of magical power. If the mana flows are unraveled, there will be a temporary but quite noticeable improvement in well-being. However, if Natsia doesn't decide to do this and simply leaves, the boy's body may not be able to withstand the stress. Suddenly she notices a book, the cover of which immediately seems quite familiar. It's strange that instead of fairy tales, he decided to read an encyclopedia of perennial plants. After making sure that no one is watching them, Natsia decides to stay in the room for a while. Observing forest herbs has long been her usual pastime, but how does Frey know about this? Born sick, he probably never left the boundaries of his native estate. Looking at the boy, she begins to guess that he, too, is eager to explore the world. It's a pity that he can't hear anything and can't answer her questions. However, someday they will be able to talk about this and continue their research together. And now this will remain their little secret, which outsiders cannot know. Having plucked up her courage, Natsia begins to gradually exude a strength that can ease the pain a little. Only Frey can use the power that he receives as a gift from Natsia. This energy cannot be noticed if your abilities are limited to human ones. A moment later, she suddenly opens her eyes, but instead of Frey, she sees a maid in front of her. The girl finally waited until her little lady finally came to her senses. That night, she had a dream that Natsia went to visit a friend to give him a necklace. However, she claims that this is not a dream at all, because the girl was found in Frey's room and brought here. Azelta has already reported everything to the Duke, and the family doctor will soon check her condition. Meeting with a doctor immediately after being overtired was not in the young lady's plans. They must have been very surprised to realize that she was able to find Frey's room without anyone's help. Unlike many others, this boy understood perfectly well what it meant. He was overjoyed to hear that the Duke's daughter was the same age as him. Sometime after this incident, Frey decides to begin studying practical magic himself. However, the result is rather disastrous, plunging him into a deep sleep once again. If he was going to die early anyway, he wanted to show himself in a good light. Deep down, he didn't ask God for too much and just wanted to take a walk with his girlfriend. Natsia understood everything correctly. He really wanted to explore the world with her. It must be said that she did everything possible to help the unfortunate boy in some way. Words that they should keep the meeting secret were overheard by Frey. He watched her with a completely different gaze, although from the outside he seemed like an ordinary sleeping child. After that incident, his feelings changed so much, as if he had received a new body. It's hard to tell if this vision was due to illness, but the body really does feel completely different. The boy feels much better, as if the illness has left his body, evaporating into thin air. Seeing his brother, he asks him to tell him what happened to him that night and whether Nadia was here. Surprisingly, the girl was actually there, promising to return as soon as he recovered. Frey asks to describe her appearance in a little more detail, without leaving out a single detail. Today, Edmund hears some strange questions, although he has no trouble answering them. After a while, he notices an encyclopedia, open and left on the table. The boy remembers that he definitely didn't have time to read this page, so who opened it? It turns out that what he saw was not a dream, and even the girl's appearance is already known to Frey. Next time he will come to her himself, but for now she needs to rest a little and gain strength. As Nadia promised, immediately after presenting the gift, she returns to the Duke's estate. However, Delfiro warned that she should report immediately if she got worse. All this time, Ethan did not say a word, silently watching his unusual daughter. Having prepared a stethoscope, the maid offers to act as an assistant during Nadia's examination. Even a doctor has no right to look at the body of a young lady if the doctor is a man. They should have chosen bigger chairs, then they wouldn't have looked stupid. The doctor assures that the condition is now much better and no additional assistance is required. Father asks never to act like this, trying to jump above your head. After listening to a portion of instructions, she admits that she was simply a little tired that evening. The doctor must know why Ethan gave permission even after that medical report. A little later, he promises to collect payment for the young man's sin, which almost led to tragedy. At this point, the girl admits that she went into the room without permission, without asking the adult's permission. Of course, the boy was already asleep on such a huge bed, so they couldn't even talk. Delfiro is not guilty of anything, and if Dad believes her, he will not punish the good doctor. She insists that Azelta dissuaded her from visiting, so she is not to blame either. In other words, all the accompanying persons did the right thing, and the blame lies entirely with Nadia. Ethan is glad that his daughter is acting so selflessly, but it can't be ignored. Usually, no one wants to take the blame for an incident that occurs. When disaster strikes, there is no one to hold accountable for the mistake made. In that case, he decides to act a little differently, since she began to protect the servants. Until the fog clears completely, the Duke forbids the girl from walking near the estate. He hands the maid an envelope, which should be given to the child after a good rest. At this point, Ethan decides to end the conversation and move on to more important matters. Once they are sure that he has left, some of the servants realize that they are very lucky. If the brave girl had not stood up for them, the punishment might not have been limited to a reprimand. However, the girl herself held on with all her might, convincing her father not to impose punishment. Ethan speaks more like a strict leader than a family member and caring father. His words about punishment sounded quite scary, although it only applied to Nadia's servants. The decision to limit walks will be made only after a doctor examines her health. In fact, he does not punish his daughter at all, but tries with all his might to protect her from the worst. However, the girl is confident that care can be shown a little more gently. Sometimes the Duke makes a face as if he is about to kill someone. At this moment, Azelta hands over the very envelope that the Duke ordered to be given to his daughter. It is strange that neither the sender nor the recipient of this letter is indicated on the envelope. Only after opening the envelope does she suddenly realize that this letter was written by Duke Ethan himself. In other words, he decided to tell her something important that he had not been able to discuss with his daughter before. Much time has passed since the girl's adoption, but the Duke still maintains his distance. If she is officially recognized as the Duke's adopted child, then why send letters? However, already in the first lines of the letter, Duke Ethan asks to call him Dad. Having read the letter to the end, the girl asks to put her father's letter aside and keep it in a drawer. She doesn't know what to write yet, but she needs to give an answer as soon as possible. It's a little strange to read something like that from the Duke, but it's even more strange to call this man your father. For a long time, Nadia tries to come to her senses, completely unaware of the servants who entered. The doctor likes her much better this way, because there is not a trace of illness on the girl's face. Fortunately, she really did begin to feel much better, and the conversation with the Duke was softer. And yet, he demands a full report of the trip, including all the complaints from the little girl. The doctor is forced to upset the Duke a little, but the girl shares her secrets only with the maid. Lately, she falls asleep as soon as she gets into her nursery. Today, news arrived at the estate about Cassian's return, although Nadia has no intention of changing her plans. The fog from overseas covers the mansion once a year, and today there was a thick fog outside. In this place, she has nothing to fear, because strong magic resistance perfectly protects against the fog. Azelta reports that other houses, including the Diaz family mansion, are completely covered in fog. The fog clots can easily penetrate the house, so she wants to know what is happening to the boy now. Edmund receives messages every day. Frey writes in them that he has become much better. It was all thanks to Natsia visiting him that evening, inspiring him with hope for the best. According to the Knight, the fog hasn't yet affected Frey, but the mana channel may close again soon. Meanwhile, Edmund recently said that he was able to see beyond the sea fog. Azelta asks to tell more about this because it is known that something huge is hidden behind it. Although the fact that Edmund has a mystic eye does not mean that he sees absolutely everything. And yet, the girl will be happy if this night shows her and Azelta something unusual. When she gets a little stronger, Nadia promises to start doing sports so she can go to the sea herself. Right now, the maid advises thinking about restoration, otherwise the dream will remain just a dream. In the Baron's family, they always tried to avoid strangers as much as possible. But here, as Natsia's health improved, she began to appear more and more often outside the estate. The maid played an important role in the restoration, trying to please the young mistress. Looking at their joy, Ethan seems to see himself when he too knew how to enjoy every day. Although he is still bothered by the thick fog, he tries not to think about the bad and to communicate with his daughter more often. Having summoned Delfiro, the Duke orders that new shoes be prepared for the child for daily walks. For some reason, she wears the same slippers, although she has more than 10 pairs of shoes in her wardrobe. The rest of the shoes are also quite soft and small, so why does she only like slippers? First, you need to carefully examine the child's satisfaction. Perhaps she has special preferences. For example, her slippers are made in a famous workshop that is famous for the funny shapes of children's shoes. The Duke demands that the chief craftsman be invited to the estate, no matter where the workshop is located. In exchange, Ethan is ready to provide him with the most expensive fabric of his choice for life. Meanwhile, another important meeting was scheduled for today. The financial assistant prepared an excellent project that could show impressive results. There is a flower called liato, the threads of which can be used to make luxurious fabric. Since the demand for liat fabric is extremely high, it is possible to continue working on a regular basis. However, Ethan doesn't want strangers hanging around the estate on a regular basis. He reminds that in this way they could very well become food for monsters, attracting victims here. The environmental research lab where Rihar studied certainly didn't teach clear thinking. If he continues to submit useless reports, Ethan asks that he not show up more than once a week. In this mood, the young man was forced to leave the office, although he hoped to please the Duke. From that day on, he was evicted to an outbuilding next to the mansion, deprived of a comfortable room. Near his office, he notices two colleagues loudly arguing about something. Upon seeing the financial assistant, both rivals briefly pause to greet Rihar. The dispute is that the last report rightfully belonged to the girl, but her friend cunningly got ahead of her. In addition, she received a candy from the hands of the young lady, which speaks of favor. To calm them down, Rihar suggests determining the winner with a simple game, in which he will be the judge. This is a fairly well-known game where you have to show rock, paper, or scissors with your hand. However, since Rihar himself becomes the winner, it turns out that he is entitled to the candy from the lady. By taking the reward, the young man receives a small consolation after his exile. If the Duke had not sent him into the outbuilding, he might have received this candy from the hands of the young lady. Every member of staff seems to dream of meeting Natsia in person, as it offers many advantages. Strangely enough, after finishing his report, Ethan again sent a man to him with a special assignment. Delfiro came to discuss the very same liat fabric, the production of which he proposed. Thus, his efforts were not in vain, and the Duke really liked the proposal. At first, the young man could not believe that his project would be launched. Delfiro assures that nothing bad will happen, even if the project ends up being unprofitable. When both of them disappear behind the office door, the conversations die down for a while. However, after a few minutes, the guys again hear a voice similar to Rihar's jubilant cry. It was hard to understand what was going on behind the door, but the Duke was able to please him with something. As expected of Duke Ethan's residence, the mansion was quite spacious. Nadia had heard that there were places here where entry was always prohibited due to magical fog. The maid knows that this place is called the Sanctuary and that it is closed 365 days a year. Usually, family valuables are kept in such places, which means you should try to get there. Azelta suddenly announces that entry is closed to everyone, but not to the Duke's closest relatives. Since she is a member of the family, there is nothing in the mansion that she is forbidden to see. Having learned about this, the little girl is eager to find out what is in the main sanctuary of the estate. It turned out that all the treasures left by the past dukes were collected in this very place. Edmund once visited the sanctuary while making a full tour of the grounds with Duke Ethan. He assures that there is nothing strange in her curiosity because family members should know their ancestors. However, before going there, she decides to do a little preparation for visiting the sanctuary. If Edmund is right, there will be found not only the treasures of the ancestors, but also items from the Misty Sea. This place will become the best laboratory for her magical research. She invites everyone to play a little, although they are long past childhood. The girl asks to bring a beautiful box that can accommodate some things. The maid immediately offers to take the gift box, although it turns out to be a little smaller. However, this will do for the first day. Natsia does not intend to waste much time on details. Armed with a small shovel, the girl persistently tries to dig a small hole. Noticing this, the servants offer their help, but only Natsia can choose what suits her. They know nothing about experimental materials, which means their help will be useless. Surprisingly, after a couple of minutes, they actually find land filled with strong mana. Of all the options offered, she likes the one that shines brighter than all the others. This is quite enough, and besides, the find fits perfectly into the gift box. The maid suggests taking it to the environmental lab to check if everything is there. Dad won't know the mud is filled with mana anyway, so Azelta shouldn't worry. Noticing the knights, Natsia reminds them that outsiders are not allowed into the sanctuary. It turned out that the servants required to accompany the young lady had access during their visit to the sanctuary. Having completed the first stage of work, she returns to Duke Ethan's study. Now the father is very busy, but for the sake of his daughter, he can take a break from work for just a few minutes. Realizing he can't get out of it, Ethan briefly asks what question is bothering her. The expression on his face was enough to scare her, but she only wanted to go on a picnic at the estate's sanctuary. She asks her dad to join her because this will make their little research more interesting. It's hard to refuse your daughter, even when she really has a lot of worries on her mind. Realizing that he has been silent for too long, she begins to assure him that Ethan may well refuse. However, a second later, the girl unexpectedly receives consent if the picnic does not last until late in the evening. Moreover, Ethan wants to be personally involved in the preparation of the event. He begins to act so actively, as if he were preparing for a real war. However, this attitude is much better than his constant muttering about work matters. Standing in front of his daughter, he admits that Natsia has long become an integral part of his family. The Duke intends to make this day her new birthday, if she so wishes. The ducal family actually doesn't know Natsia's date of birth, so the day was never celebrated. Of course, this proposal was well received, and it will be fun to combine the two events at once. The Duke warns that during the foggy season, entry for outsiders is strictly controlled. However, for Natsia, the most important thing has already happened, because Dad is no longer angry about unauthorized walks. Every day he worries more and more seriously about his daughter's words, afraid of missing every detail. If she wants anything else, you should say so right now. Finally, she directly asks her dad to allow the sick boy to attend her birthday party. Instead, the maid decides to answer herself, reminding him about the restricted entry for outsiders. Usually, at this time, no one can enter the mansion except those appointed as escorts. Natsia wanted to take this opportunity to bring Frey to the mansion. But after this request, the atmosphere in the room changes dramatically. It seems that she will be forbidden to do this. The girl decides to go all the way, reminding her father of his own words about any request his daughter might make. After all, if he wanted to throw the birthday party himself, Ethan simply had to make concessions. This boy needs not only the help of a doctor, but also the care that Natsia can provide. There is no escaping this girl. The Duke promises to conduct a strict check. If Frey can pass it, he will be allowed entry into the mansion and consequently into the family sanctuary. Natsia suggests conducting the inspection a little later, when the thick fog has completely cleared. The maid must upset her, but the fog will only clear in a month. Unexpectedly, the Duke promises to arrange everything as his adopted daughter wishes. If she's so confident in this boy, he's willing to take the risk and see how it all ends. Besides, after the picnic you can invite this boy and arrange an additional banquet. Thus, as long as the girl feels well, she is allowed to do whatever she wants. However, today it's worth going to bed early, otherwise the family doctor will scold me again. It turned out that Delfiro had not left the estate, having decided to stay here for a while. He explains that he initially decided to wait for the young lady for a short conversation. It seems that the conversation will be followed by another examination procedure, although the girl does not feel any pain. She saw with her own eyes the syringe in his small bag, hoping that it was not intended for her. Unfortunately, the doctor actually decided to give her a painful injection right on her birthday. The doctor assures that the injection will be no more painful than the bite of a small mosquito, but she has heard something like this before. To make sure the girl is completely healthy, Delfiro needs her blood. The doctor asks her to trust him, even if the sight of the needle seemed too frightening to her. After the injection, delicious treats prepared especially for the brave girl await her. The maid confirms his words, reminding him that she didn't get a single piece. Well, if she's ready, Delfiro can begin the simple blood drawing procedure. He will not bother her anymore for 10 days, because all other procedures have already been carried out. Suddenly, Nadia notices a funny teddy bear embroidered on a bag of syringes. In this way, he wanted to change the tense atmosphere a little so that she would not be afraid of injections. The most interesting thing is that Delfiro made this bag with his own hands, although he was not asked to do so. He is still confident that in one moment everything will be over and the girl will not have time to feel pain. Nadia's trust isn't easy to earn, but something is changing in their relationship today. Approaching him, the lady declares that she always liked him very much, although sometimes she behaved badly. Only his doctor's uniform constantly scares me away, so it's better to return in regular clothes. If Delfiro fulfills this small request, she will never be afraid again. And now she offers to go on a picnic with them because he is her escort. Nadia had probably never had such conversations with a doctor before, fearing unnecessary publicity. Dropping the syringe, he hurries to get a clean one, asking forgiveness for his sluggishness. And yet, the young lady's last words repeated over and over in his head. He decides to ask again if Nadia really liked him all this time. At some point, she gets tired of repeating the same thing, asking the doctor to just believe her without asking again. For a moment, she can barely restrain herself from hating the slow-witted Delfiro again. There comes a moment in a girl's life when the doors of the most forbidden room open before her. She has no idea what the family sanctuary looks like from the inside or what the atmosphere will be like. Because of the thick fog, it is difficult to see anything. You will have to make your way by touch. It is much easier to move around in the fog with Edmund, who is the owner of a magical eye. The girl decides to ask one question that she was previously afraid to say. Suddenly she forgets what she wanted to say, but he asks her to think carefully. At least now it wouldn't seem strange if she looked the knight in the eye again. The sanctuary is located on a large rectangular area, fenced off on all sides. It is too small for people to live in, and the walls are covered with grapevines. Judging by the memories from a past life, there is a burial vault somewhere nearby. Lost in thought, she again looks as if she has been looking at Edmund's unusual eyes for a long time. She is curious to know who created the sanctuary and what it was like before. Ethan explains that this place belonged to his family for a long time and was used for rituals. Almost all records of the sanctuary have been lost, except for a will left by the first Duke. The will states that it can be used as a last resort if monsters come calling. Listening to her father, Nadia seems to forget that she is in the body of a 5-year-old child and can know such things. However, she cannot pretend that she does not understand a single word. The Duke decides to say it differently so that the little girl can understand the information. Simply put, when family members are in danger, you need to run to the sanctuary as quickly as possible. This tone is a little alarming. In general, she has no problems with logical thinking. Ethan initially planned to go into the underground passage, but then decided not to risk it. There are still too many variables, which means the path through the dungeon is too dangerous. If Nadia insists, he is ready to allow a visit to the environmental department. It's strange to hear from the outside that a 5-year-old child is interested in environmental issues. Today, Nadia will see that very stone that absorbs excess fog. However, it is unclear where the magic stones come from if magic is forbidden in this world. Because they are hollow, these stones absorb the fog like a dry sponge. The fog only comes out a little but does not pose any threat to health or life. For the first time in a long time, she again finds objects that deserve close examination. It must be said that there are plenty of stones here, even if she decides to collect them. When the magic stones absorbed all the mana, the vision instantly cleared. She no longer needs special accompaniment to discern certain details. The main interesting detail is the fact that everything is already ready for a picnic by the time they arrive. The father made sure that his daughter did not waste precious time on routine preparations. She also finds funny toys that look like her slippers. If you look closely, this soft toy looks so much like slippers, it's as if they were created by the same master. She's very cute, but who came up with the idea of making a toy like this? Noticing the doubt in her gaze, the Duke decides to replace the toy with a better quality one. He thinks the eyes are too different, as if it was created in a cheap workshop. However, he forgot to ask the opinion of the one for whom these cute toys were intended. Next time it would be better not to do this, but now the girl is asking for the toy to be returned. Realizing that he was a little hasty, Ethan suddenly changes his mind, finding her rather unusual. Ethan will love any of them if his daughter likes the toys. He chose the sketches for the toys himself, and now he sees the master's finished work for the first time. Besides the funny teddy bears, there is another one. For example, the snake on the table was also not real. Judging by Natsia's appearance, she liked the latter the least. She wouldn't want to play with a poisonous snake. Upon hearing the refusal, Ethan orders the servants to immediately get rid of the snake, leaving only the bear. At the same time, the maid decides to get rid of all the unnecessary junk, leaving the heavy stuff for the men. All this time, Delfiro does not calm down, carrying some papers with him and leaving detailed notes. Looking at him, it seems as if he is recording every detail during their walk. At this moment, something else catches her attention. She just needs to look a little closer. She claims to have found a real treasure for her environmental research. Traces left by the unknown creature may still contain traces of mana. It would be better if she looked into it carefully in the lab when she got back. First of all, it is worth pouring some sand, endowed with strong mana. As expected, the sand immediately sticks, as if the particles are drawn to each other. She had definitely stumbled upon traces of mana. The only question was who had left them there. It turned out that Dad had prepared for the picnic even more thoroughly than Natsia had expected. Having moved the furniture, the maid helps her climb onto the sofa so that it will be much more comfortable for her and her dad. They probably still think that for a little girl this is just a funny game. They don't understand how important research is and what it can give to the modern world. Grinding and pressing the herb to make an elixir can increase the amount of mana. And then, to find the source of the unusual mark, all that remains is to apply 1 drop of juice. After a few seconds, she realizes that the trail leads to the only building where there are no vines. She decides to sneak in there a little later, once the event is over. Suddenly, the Duke decides to help her, noticing how important this game is for the little girl. A moment later, the Duke finds in his hands what was recently a trace of mana. But now all traces of mana have simply disappeared, although only a true wizard is capable of such a thing. The Duke is not a magician, which means this is a special natural ability of the traces found. She calls the maid and asks her to bring a small bowl here for another fun game. This is not difficult to arrange, although the girl does not fully understand the young lady's intentions. The girl asks you to simply trust her. Her loyal guards will take care of the rest. However, today Edmund had the chance to see something that he would never have dreamed of. He knew Duke Ethan liked to have fun sometimes, but this kind of fun was a little scary. In his new suit, he seems to be trying to fill the gap in raising his daughter without a mother. Ethan is a little embarrassed to wear it, but this way they can have a fun picnic. Nadia is not at all against the masquerade, but at first it is difficult to say anything definite. At that moment, the cherished word itself bursts from the girl's lips, and this is exactly what Ethan asked for in the letter. For the first time in his life, a man hears himself called father, without formal titles. Nadia herself was a little taken aback. She didn't want to call him that at all. In his letter, the Duke devoted many lines to this request, convincing her that she had long since become a member of the family. And now, they look at each other completely differently, gradually getting used to the new. It must be said that the costume also played an important role, removing the barrier between father and daughter. In response, the Duke timidly calls the girl his daughter, hoping that she does not regret anything. If it weren't for the picnic they had with Ethan, they might have continued calling each other by their old names. Nadia had never experienced similar feelings in her past life. Her biological father called her his daughter only when it was advantageous to do so. This is why a feeling of awkwardness for the spoken word arises in the girl's soul. Meanwhile, the Duke decides to continue the fun by completing a small experiment. By all logic, this should increase the mana level, but instead the mana flow slowly fades away. The experiment needs to be stopped immediately. The girl asks to give her what is on the plate. It's strange, but she asks about it as if she is worried about her father's safety. Ethan reminds her that the girl can call him that at any time. This relationship should continue beyond the childish fun of a picnic. Without even hearing his words, she suddenly loudly calls Ethan her dad, as if overcoming old obstacles. It is clear that this treatment is not easy for Nadia, but she does not intend to return to the past. Now Dad has to answer the question of what the grass in her hands is called. Realizing that she is holding cilia, another incredible idea comes to mind. It is known that cilia can only be found in the southern seas, which is why it is so difficult to obtain. To prepare it, a special recipe is required, which the imperial chef definitely has. If there is even the slightest chance to save a human life, the doctor is obliged to help. The herb the good doctor spoke of is found here in great abundance. Although the ducal family considers it a weed, it is sometimes grown for special purposes. What's most interesting right now, though, is how strangely she reacts to the fog. Nadia states that she wants to find out all the information related to this unusual herb. If his daughter had decided to delve so deeply into her research, he simply had to accommodate her. Having called Delfiro to him, he intends to entrust the doctor with a special task on behalf of his daughter. Ethan orders the order to be relayed to all personnel in the Environmental Research Department. They should prepare a briefing about this plant and present the information in a language that any child can understand. Just in case he decides to clarify how much detailed information the young lady needed. In fact, she needs to know literally everything, but she must not reveal her real age. I wonder what the required amount of knowledge is for an average 5-year-old child. If it were up to Nadia, she would simply ask them not to filter the information and to tell her everything she could find out. For research, you need to use all the tools without missing the slightest detail. This answer is quite understandable to any adult, unlike 5-year-old girls. As expected, the assistant had no questions left except where Nadia came from. In a past life, this kind of speech was habitual, and we need to find out whether it will work now. The Duke understands that his daughter is more interested in research than childish dress-up games. With her thirst for knowledge, it's time to get a good teacher who is capable of working with child prodigies. At this moment, she asks her dad to do the same thing he did a few minutes ago. Suddenly, it seemed to her that the Duke smiled, and then immediately hid the smile. Perhaps it's worth moderating her desires a little, otherwise her father will consider Nadia a spoiled child. And yet, today she is allowed a little more than on ordinary weekdays. After some time, the Duke grinds up all the sand that the girl brought with her. As a result, any mana Ethan touched consistently backfired. This discovery makes us take a fresh look at familiar things and continue our research. Having forgotten herself, the girl almost regretted not having taken the doctor's recommendations into account. Her health is still too weak to run around the meadow so carefree. The Duke asks you to be a little more careful because he is already taking a risk by agreeing to today's picnic. He suggests coming back here next time because the sanctuary won't run away from them. The servants will take care of the cleaning, and she should return to the house and rest after a long walk. Finally, the girl decides to say something that she would have been ashamed to say out loud before. She asks her dad to smile a little more often, and this noticeably lifts her mood. She really likes it when Ethan gives her a smile because she can give it back. The truth is that this man's life was too difficult to smile easily at the world. And yet, he promises to try to do this more often only in the presence of his beloved daughter. Thus, the young lady manages to do much more than she initially planned. She has no intention of washing the bowl at all next time the Duke will continue his ritual. He will have to rub the grass for so long that he will eventually wear a hole in the bowl. Lost in her thoughts, she almost mentioned the mana for which she was forcing the Duke to do this. Azelta suggests deciding what to do with the remaining traces from the sanctuary. She wanted to ask about this a few hours ago after the picnic ended. When it was all over, Nadia asked to break the stone, taking a couple of pieces with her. For some reason, the girl decided that this black stone could be used to make a shiny decoration. Of course, there are more suitable stones in the world for such purposes. In the end, she was slightly misunderstood, and all the stones from the meadow were dragged along with her. Nadia asks to take only a few small pieces with her. Is it really so hard to understand? Having quickly corrected the mistake, they bring her several stones of a size that can be worn around her neck. She plans to make a beautiful necklace out of them, although it is unclear why she did not like the diamonds. You won't need a master's help at all, it will be a gift made by her own hands. She will definitely give one of the necklaces to Frey. The boy will certainly be delighted by the attention. If the purity of this stone is sufficient, it will be able to hold her mana as well. For the ailing Frey, such a necklace will become an artifact containing streams of healing mana. Unfortunately, the surface of the stone is too hard to engrave a name. The easiest way is to write something with ink, hoping that the mana will not reject the paint. If you know exactly what you want to write on the stone, then making an engraving using magic will be easy. The more desire she brings to ease Frey's pain, the stronger the artifact's effect will be. After a short time, the inscription was ready, and it seemed to turn out quite funny. Of course, this is not quite the result that the girl imagined when she wrote the inscription. Realizing that this is not a gift, Nadia asks the maid to help her disguise the drawing. In response, the girl tries to convince her that the main thing is not the drawing at all, but the desire to please. If she takes up the work herself, the stone will turn out a little smaller. The lady asks only that a small part of the drawing remain almost unnoticed. Still not understanding the purpose of the drawing, she promises to do everything to make Frey like it. Once the necklace is ready, he will be able to live in peace and finally become completely healthy. Meanwhile, the servant must report news that is unlikely to be good for the Duke. Since Ethan adopted the girl, he began to spend much less time on work, but as soon as it was decided to have a joint picnic, he immediately got down to his usual business. After the picnic, Ethan thought most often about the briefing he had ordered for that evening. At this moment, another visitor appears at the door, whose voice is easily distinguished from all the others. The financial assistant heard that the Duke had decided to discuss the subject of fabric production again. For Rihar, this was his first informal meeting with Ethan in the annex. As he promised, the young man collected all the information from the picnic and put it all down on paper. The items that were used are described in detail on 2 pages. He sorted them according to a special scale, assigning each item its own rating. To be honest, Ethan didn't think the assistant would take it so seriously. The report is written very skillfully. Now, Rihar should provide the girl with products from popular brands. Among all 213 brands, only the one she likes the most will win. The Duke demands that applications be submitted immediately, otherwise Nadia will not be able to complete everything in time. At this point, Ethan asks for something strange, as if a couple hundred brands weren't enough. He wants to get products from the brand that makes the flying squirrel pillow. In the future, the issue of his daughter creating her own products will also be discussed. To prioritize these issues, Ethan moves the finance department to the main building. Of course, he wanted to appear as a caring father, but no one expected such a turn of events. At first, the financial assistant objects, because this would require changing the entire system. However, he soon quickly realizes that any delay could cost him his career. Leaving the Duke's office, Rihar promises to finish this by this evening. Come to think of it, this gives the young man another chance to earn Ethan's trust. Previously, he never gave such an opportunity and simply replaced the offending workers. This young man always seemed to him to be someone who was seriously interested in business, and now he was convinced of this. Still, it's not that easy to make sense of the reports he compiled all night. Meanwhile, Ethan's entire team was ready to carry out the briefing preparation task. First of all, Jacob reminds that the young lady reads these difficult books in her free time. They have nothing to do with plants, and besides, the girl recently turned 5. Typically, the story of the unification of continents is not in the interests of a 5-year-old child. This girl could easily have read many more books than any of them. Today's children are much smarter, which means they should prepare seriously for the briefing. Still, Nicole doesn't understand why she chose to hold a briefing specifically on plants. It is unlikely that Nadia wants her education to be conducted at the academic level. Jacob thinks that she doesn't look like a child at all, although her appearance is no different from that of a child. Eamon agrees with his friend. He saw with his own eyes how carefully the little girl collected cilia. First, she dug up the soil around the plant so as not to damage the roots. This cannot be understood without basic knowledge of plants, especially at her age. In addition to knowledge about plants, the girl has a fairly good understanding of physiology. It's scary to imagine the burden that fell on Natsia, since toys were replaced by books so early. At that moment, a male voice was heard in the distance, although it was easy to recognize. The person in charge of finance is in high spirits after the Duke's new assignment. Each of them would like to be in Rihar's place, because it is a direct path to the top of a career. He was the only one who immediately got into the main building as soon as the department was moved there. Jacob would hate to interrupt their discussion, but now is the time to prepare the briefing. The lady really wants to know everything about this plant, and they are obliged to provide information. He advises against drawing complex figures and graphics, replacing boring images with something cute. It's hard to see how a briefing and cute illustrations go together, but that's what they get paid for. For example, the Duke said something about a flying squirrel, which means we can take this symbol as a basis. By evening, Rose was ready to begin a briefing dedicated to a well-known plant. While she tells the story of how Cilia came to be, the Duke admires the flying squirrel. Using her example, the girl intends to tell everything that science knows about this plant. Cilia can live even in the very center of dense fog, where it thickens to the limit. To date, 7 stages of the life of this mysterious plant are known. Since cilia is common in these areas, it is often used as an analgesic. In other words, it is used to make medicines that significantly reduce pain. At this point, Natsia interrupts her performance, trying to understand how much the pain is decreasing. As a doctor, Delfiro can explain this himself, wanting to participate a little in the briefing. There is a certain flow of energy in the body that is often studied by technical professionals. Through the arms, chest, legs, and hands, this so-called energy flow passes through the entire body. The girl asks to stop again, not understanding what the flying squirrel and the flow of energy have to do with it. They didn't actually want to take the flying squirrel for the briefing, but the Duke likes it. He then quickly shows the direction in which the flow passes through the entire body. It flows as violently as the waves in the sea and as calm as the mountain wind on the hills. Natsia understands that this is the very power that accumulates in the heart, changing its state. The doctor assures that every person has flow and it can be increased with practice. In other words, in this world, even ordinary people can have what only magicians have in the world of Natsia. The plant is used to slow down or even stop the flow if it exceeds the norm. She is so deeply immersed in thought that she hardly resembles a 5-year-old child. Only outwardly the girl remains the same young lady, but her facial expression makes you think. Natsia suddenly declares that she understood every word of the lecture, thanking her for the excellent preparation. With these words, she again reveals her age, forgetting to behave like a child. Realizing that she needs support, the Duke decides to console his daughter a little. Ethan asks not to worry about anything, offering to arrange lectures on a regular basis. In these lands, no one would dare to forbid her research. Her father would take care of the rest. In other words, Natsia has the right to do whatever she wants without thinking about the opinions of other people. She used to think that she couldn't trust anyone, but after such sincere kindness, her opinion changes. With his words, Ethan seems to be telling her that he will always be on her side, no matter what happens in the future. Of course, it would be stupid to refuse something like this, so Natsia easily accepts the offer. She is curious about everything related to plants and now she intends to study them. Ethan orders the Environmental Studies Department to begin preparing for full-scale lectures. Thus, he fully approves of his daughter's research, paving the way to new knowledge. From now on, the order and rules became applicable to everyone arriving at the estate. Regardless of origin and status, guards are instructed to carefully inspect guests. When Frey first comes to visit, even he is forced to answer all the questions posed. The boy explains that he was invited to his friend's birthday party and that he poses no threat. In response, the guard asks him to wait a little while his name is checked against the guest list. Having completed this, he is asked to place his hand on the stone for another check. A second later, he feels as if heavy energy begins to leave his body, making him lighter than air. It's strange that in order to attend the festival you have to go through strange rituals. Finally, the guard congratulates the boy on passing the inspection, allowing him to enter the house. Of course, Frey's own knights are not allowed. The Duke's knight will be assigned to him. The brother said that these were just precautions, so the boy did not want to argue. A knight is not needed for escort, but for the case when one unwanted guest appears. It felt like he had come to visit the emperor and not his girlfriend. And yet, he finds himself on the estate grounds where he will soon meet Natsia. Suddenly, he sees in front of him a toy that doesn't seem ordinary at all. Previously, the boy did not know that children's toys could be so huge. If all Natsia's toys are so big, then how does she play with them? Understanding this in his own way, Edmund decides to immediately draw his sword, destroying the dangerous monster. With a few swings of his sword, he cuts it into pieces, protecting everyone nearby. The problem was that the monster had no intention of resisting as it flew through the air. It's a pity that the boy didn't have time to tell his brother about the expensive toy that was standing there a second ago. Now they are just pieces of white cotton wool, fit only for Dr. Delfiro's work. Seeing the expensive item damaged, the financial assistant almost faints. It was a gift made for the lady by special order of Duke Ethan. In other words, the girl's main birthday gift has been turned into useless trash. Surely, Edmund wanted to give her something different and not a ruined holiday at all. Having learned about what happened, the owner of the estate decides that he is also partly to blame. Nadia likes big eyes and round faces, and that toy's face was too detailed. Ethan ordered a large dog so his daughter could use it as her new bed. However, it didn't look like a bed either, since there wasn't even a ladder for that. Only now does the Duke realize that the toy was more scary than beautiful. It's hard to argue with that statement, especially if you've recently chopped it into small pieces. If the Duke believes that he organized the gift poorly, then Edmund will not be punished. He should no longer do anything that might shake the knight's trust in the Duke's eyes. After a short consultation, the knight returns back, knowing that he has become the hero of the day. He immediately meets the gaze of his friends, who already know about the incident with the toy. The knight simply cut the gift prepared for the young lady with his sword before his brother's eyes. Noticing his return, Delfiro sympathizes with his friend who accidentally made a mistake. He rarely visits the military registration and enlistment office, feeling uncomfortable surrounded by other knights. This time Edmund has a meeting with the head of the military service, otherwise he wouldn't have come here. Having noticed the boss, the guy is already ready to see a real show, although now his friend is not to be envied. Oddly enough, the conversation was not about the broken toy, but about the guard who was on duty last night. Edmund demands a detailed report on all guards taking up their posts. Usually he behaved much more modestly, but today he imagined himself to be a commander. Realizing that the guy is following the Duke's orders, the boss promises to provide a report. Rumor has it that he recently saw something strange at the gate, which he has been ordered to keep secret for now. In response, he asks not to worry, he will sort everything out himself soon. In fact, what the knight accidentally saw did not at all look like an ordinary phenomenon. Shortly after the briefing, the main building of the ducal estate became much more crowded. Each employee wanted to personally present the gift, wanting to appear welcoming in the eyes of the young lady. As soon as she climbed 2 floors, she was presented with many pleasant gifts. Azelta offers to treat them to something in return, for example, make hot chocolate. However, now there are more important things to do than gifts, because the flow already appeared once in a past life. Still, a little tea break with some sweets won't hurt if you take a couple of minutes to do it. A girl can eat 2 candies a day according to the doctor. This is the best daily norm. She heard correctly. Nadia was offered only 2 candies when there was a whole box lying nearby. You don't have to think about the choice because they all have different shapes, but the same taste. The lady decides to leave the most beautiful candies for later so that she can admire them longer. At this point, the environmental department staff decides to personally visit the room. Rose apologizes for having to disturb her for the 3rd time in one day, but she has prepared something special, and perhaps the young lady will be interested in this specimen. If any words are unclear, the girl will be happy to explain their meaning. Her report said that cantha was as common as any other weed, even though she had never encountered it. Frey believes that in these lands the cantu flowers simply do not receive sunlight, which is why they look faded. It is surprising that the boy developed knowledge about plants even more than some of the employees. Moreover, this appearance looks quite impressive, noticeably lifting the mood. Frey is very glad that after all the inspections at the security post, he finally got home. The boy did not want to interrupt the learning process, but he could tell us something himself. On the way, he briefly visited the Duke before arriving at his friend's room. The main thing is that there is not a single trace on his face of the illness that has plagued Frey for so long. This is probably the best gift that could be given to her. Suddenly, the girl grabs his hand. For some reason, she is sure that Frey needs rest. Although he arrived in a carriage, the long journey must have been exhausting for his poor health. She decides to let him lie down for a while and, if necessary, take a nap after the ride. Not understanding what was happening, he obediently followed Natsia's instructions, not daring to contradict his mistress. However, being in her bed isn't very good, especially since he's still in street clothes. In response, she asks him not to argue. After all, the bed won't break under his weight. To play with Natsia, he needs to get a good night's sleep and gain fresh energy. For a while, Rose watches what is happening in silence, not quite understanding why there is such concern. Wanting to talk a little about the flora and fauna of the Earth, she understands that this topic will have to wait a little. Everyone else should also be quieter while the little guest is resting in the room. There are probably already enough questions about the young lady, but this case is special. She doesn't want to listen to the guard's report about his duties on duty. Moreover, he claims that the boy could become that very unwanted guest of the estate. It's really not easy for him to talk about this, but Natsia needs to hear what everyone knows. In response, she happily reports that the guard is doing an excellent job. She is sure that with such efficiency, he will definitely become the head of the guard. And now she needs to rest, and the young man should just leave her alone. With these words, she quickly closes the door of the room, once again finding herself next to Frey. Nadia asks him to tell her if something hurts, there is a family doctor on the estate for this case. Apparently he lost control of his mana or something else happened. The flow of mana moves in a strange way in the wrong direction, constantly confusing the sides. He admits that sometimes he does get into a lot of pain, although this has become less frequent. It is clear that he is a little embarrassed to talk about this and spoil the young lady's mood. It's as if he doesn't understand that caring for the boy is the main reason Frey was invited to the estate. Taking his head, she asks him to trust her and never hide his beauty. She has no idea how it happened, but Frey has the most beautiful eyes in the world. Just like his older brother's eyes, they shine like precious stones to the delight of all people. This is the second time Frey has heard a compliment about her eyes, although others had a different opinion. At this moment, something strange begins to happen to him, as if the disease is manifesting itself again. The boy's body is unable to withstand the excess mana, and he begins to suffocate. It is strange that when he sees a seizure, the knight behaves like a child frightened by a ghost. In his place, Nadia would have called the servants long ago, instead of stupidly standing in one place. Unable to bear the pain, the boy asks to call the family doctor if Delfiro is in the estate. It is difficult for him to even scream, and he is no longer able to go outside or go down. Surely, if Frey had been left alone, this minute could have been the last in his life. Natsia remembers the very amulet that she painstakingly prepared as a gift. She suggests taking it right now and just waiting for the girl to call someone into the room. This can be considered a gift in honor of a strong friendship, so that he will forever remember the first meeting. The black stone necklace was made by her own hands, meaning there are only 2 copies of the piece. Even if the drawing was not very beautiful, the stone was supposed to correct the defect. In response, the boy assures that both the stone and her beautiful drawing are equally good. He always dreamed of meeting Natsia, but he didn't think that the meeting would take place in such a setting. It's a little strange to hear this confession. It sounds quite sincere. If Natsia understands everything correctly, last time he really did not sleep after hearing her words. Meanwhile, the knight asks the doctor for forgiveness, but the information about the examination is already ready. He asks to bring them to the table quickly. He has just finished sorting out the other papers. According to the information, Frey's servants are currently in isolation by order of Duke Ethan. It would be bad if there was an unwanted guest in the mansion, so this measure is quite reasonable. However, if this particular boy turns out to be the unwanted guest, it will be difficult to explain this to Natsia. It's a shame that children have to suffer so much, but hard times call for the right decisions. Delfiro decides to conduct one simple experiment to test his theory. The lady's blood reacts with a reagent that identifies people with severe headaches. At this moment, it seems as if she accidentally falls out of his hands, although the doctor has done this many times. The lady's blood samples react strongly, and Delfiro begins to understand something. We need to hide this as quickly as possible, otherwise the girl could be in danger. Incredibly, her blood continues to emit something similar to magical energy. In the physical world, it manifests as a reagent that reacts to monsters in the Sea of Fog. Such a reaction should not occur with human blood, especially since the girl had not left the house for a long time. Instead of the dim light usually seen during experiments, a bright pink flame is emitted. Finally, the doctor realizes that simply hiding her samples is not enough. We need to act now, otherwise Delfiro himself will end up being blamed for this misfortune. He decides to report this to the Duke after all. It concerns the safety of his daughter. If you remember, Natsuya's biological father was proud of his decision to give his 5-year-old daughter to another family. He believed that Duke Ethan would be a wonderful father and would be able to raise the girl on her feet. That same evening, rumors begin to spread about the Duke's new business. Ethan is said to spend a lot of money on Liat fabric, making children's clothes. It seems that he truly values his adopted daughter and will look for a way to bring the girl into high society. After the news spread throughout the empire, letters began pouring in from everywhere. Each such letter was not worth paying attention to, so the Duke simply burned the unnecessary trash. There were so many applications that the paperwork would have been enough to light a fireplace for a whole year. The letters mostly came from nobles who had long supported the emperor. Even if the imperial family manipulates him, the Duke decides to stand up for his daughter to the end. At this moment, the family doctor bursts into the room, wanting to tell important news. Today, Delfiro is acting a little strange, as if he had learned something terrible. This concerns the young lady, so he asks to put matters aside. Afterwards, he takes Ethan to the place where he recently conducted an experiment with blood. It's impossible to say for sure, but Natsuya's blood really doesn't look like human blood. The doctor is sure that the girl has no health problems, but the reaction to the reagent is too strange. He asks for consent to conduct additional tests using other reagents. In case something doesn't go according to plan, the young lady's black stone should also be checked. This is usually done in a mansion when a person needs to be tested for signs of monster genes. It is not a fact that the girl is a monster, even if the blood reacts with the substance. However, the research conducted may help her in further treatment if a new disease is discovered. After listening to Delfiro, the Duke gives his fatherly consent, hoping to find a way to ease her pain. Whatever the outcome, it is important to understand correctly what her long-standing illness is connected with. The next day, Natsuya learns that Frey stayed to sleep in his older brother's room. Thanks to the girl, he was able to rest, and his condition became much more stable. Sure, they were still children, but what if they were spotted in the room after they reached adulthood? Quite recently, the officer's core was moved closer to the extension, which is quite far from here. For some reason, the maid cannot take her to Frey, otherwise the Duke will be angry. However, now you can take a short walk near your home, taking a plant guide with you. Hearing this, the girl immediately heads for the door, not wanting to waste a minute. This time she asks Azelta not to follow her around, as usually happens. Her room is on the 4th floor, which means going down is much more difficult. It turns out that you can't do without the help of a maid. It's in vain to refuse her services so early. Meanwhile, many knights are unhappy with Edmund's decision to leave his younger brother here. It was lucky that the officer's office was empty, and we could behave openly. The boys had long noticed that both brothers looked exactly like their late father. However, stupid talk does not reach the ears of the kind boy who found himself in the mansion. Looking around, he realizes that his brother spends a lot of time here. The furniture in the study is much taller than what he is used to seeing in his room. Still, he really enjoys being here, and some inconveniences can be gotten used to. Seeing the bright sunlight, he wants to go for a short walk. However, there is a lot of thick fog outside now, and it is unlikely that he will be praised for such a decision. It's a pity that the fog thickened just now, when the boy began to feel much better. Looking again at his gift from Natsuya, he tries to understand what is depicted on the stone. The gift is especially pleasant because the girl herself was looking for a black stone specifically for the necklace. Judging by her words, the girl is truly sure that their first meeting took place yesterday. At that moment, he hears a loud child's voice arguing about something with the knight. Throwing aside the silly warnings, she declares that she just wants to take a short walk down the hallway. It's strange, but now she's ready to go against her father for the sake of meeting this boy. Thus, neither the guard nor the sweet maid Azelta could dissuade the young lady. As a result, a few minutes later, the girl is carefree reading a book next to Frey. He admits that he diligently studied plants, although he did not become as smart as scientists. However, he will be glad if the knowledge becomes useful for the young lady's future research. By the way, such close attention somewhat interferes with the normal communication of friends. Having understood him without further ado, Nadia demands that he not stand over his soul as if he were guarding a prison. She admits that Frey has never seen her in a truly angry mood. Whatever the reason, she doesn't like the fact that other people are talking about the two brothers. In fact, his family's problem is not so simple, and he has long been accustomed to constant surveillance. The girl believes that the gift of seeing what is inaccessible to everyone else is his advantage. However, in reality, this is not always the case, because people treat magic with caution. Frey knows that many years ago the former Duchess died precisely because of these unusual eyes. Unlike the previous Duke, who was cold and harsh, the Duchess was loved by all her subjects. The boy's father was a knight, and with the help of a magical eye, could see through the thick fog. For a long time he was entrusted with the most important tasks, but one day something happened that changed his life forever. That morning, when Madame greeted the servants, they still had no idea about anything. The people who saw Madame were shocked, realizing that she was not an ordinary person at all. Instead of one woman, two mothers stood opposite the workers, holding each other's hands. If anyone other than Frey had told her about this, the girl would hardly have believed the stupid fabrications. The boy warns that monsters can take the form of familiar people. Before a person realizes that he is dealing with a monster, it will be too late. One of the two mothers was definitely a fake, which meant the fake had to be gotten rid of. For this purpose, the chief knight of the estate, who had been considered his father for many years, was summoned. The man quickly identified the monster, cutting it down with his sword in one precise blow. For a while he stood silently in one place, confident that he had saved the inhabitants of the mansion. Mother could hardly hold back her tears, realizing the danger she had to endure. All this time it seemed to her as if her own daughter was walking next to her, and not at all an exact copy of herself. It turns out that these monsters can look different in the eyes of each person. At first, everyone praised Father Frey, because thanks to his magical eye, the monster was identified. But after Madame came to her senses, a much more serious problem arose. She called the knight to thank the hero, but he began to insist that he saw a second monster. Having said these words, he decided to deal with him on the spot before he took on another form. The madam insisted that she was an ordinary person, although the knight could no longer hear the words. Just like last time, he quickly got rid of her with one blow of his sword, without any doubt that he was doing the right thing. Of course, the servants were waiting for the moment when the human corpse would turn into the corpse of a monster. No matter how much time passed, the dead mistress of the estate remained with the same body. Ultimately, the boy's father could not bear the feeling of guilt and committed suicide a week later. After this, the checkpoint now carries out an additional check using a black stone. There is a theory that their eyes are sinister, and Frey is constantly afraid that something like this will happen again. The truth is that his father was possessed by magic that is released when a monster dies. If it were her past life now, Nadia would never have believed what happened. Frey is not reborn. This 5-year-old child has truly been through a lot. Nadia assures that she would not have asked him, knowing how difficult it is to remember the past. At such moments, it's better to just eat something sweet, then he will feel better. All the other treats will go to him too if one cookie is not enough. From then on, Edmund swore an oath to give Duke Ethan everything he had to make up for his father's sin. In response, the Duke ordered him to become a military officer and guard the mansion for the rest of his life. At that moment, he realized that the people in the mansion would not trust him, but he still did not dare to refuse. He is still convinced that the sins of parents are passed on to their children. There is no guarantee that this will not happen again, but Nadia asks not to think about the bad. She thanks the boy for telling his biggest secret and confiding in his friend. Someday he too will learn to use the magic eye just like his older brother. In this case, Frey will be able to continue the business by becoming a knight and entering the service of the Duke. She swears on her name that such a tragedy will never happen to Frey again. It's strange that she's so sure of it, but the oath does sound quite convincing. These words brought tears to her eyes again, even though she had only recently calmed the boy down. Frey isn't entirely sure he could make the right choice if he were in his father's shoes. If something goes wrong, there will definitely be people nearby who are ready to guide you on the right path. As a sorceress, Nadia is indeed able to help in some things, and for Frey this is a real stroke of luck. However, everything depends on how pure his intentions will be in the future. That same day, the maid asks the young lady about her meeting with the mysterious boy. Frey started to look really happy after Nausea became friends with him. If she's a little tired, Azelta suggests getting a good night's sleep in her room. However, this is just an offer, which you don't have to agree to. She again speaks to her as if the girl were an ordinary, ignorant child. Until now, she really didn't feel like sleeping, but after meeting Frey, her strength disappeared somewhere. Luckily, there are plenty of things in the room that can quickly lift a girl's spirits. The entire room is covered in flying squirrel toys, as if that's all that's sold in a children's store. At this point, Rose again rushes to tell something interesting about recent research. But the main thing is that instead of the usual badges, each employee wears a flying squirrel on his chest. Duke Ethan gave such instructions, knowing the preferences of his beloved daughter. In her past life, Nausea often took part in the celebration of great victories, but it never happened that she became the main face of this event. Today wasn't a birthday at all, and the girl was congratulated simply for existing. She asks that you wake her up in a couple of hours if she can't wake up on her own by the evening. Judging by the reaction, if the maid couldn't wake the lady up, she would simply leave her to sleep. Azelta advises her to go to bed early, otherwise she won't be able to have fun at the party as she should. And yet it's strange, because no one even knows Nausea's birthday, although the holiday is still planned. Previously, this day had nothing to do with her at all, requiring no special preparations. And now the Duke decided to give the girl a real birthday, like all the other children. It's still difficult to get used to new conditions, although you get used to good things faster. She wants to know what date the Duke's birthday celebration is scheduled for. In response, Azelta advises asking about this directly. The Duke will certainly be pleased with her concern. Since he is going to meet his daughter halfway, she is obliged to do the same, becoming even closer to Ethan. In this case, Azelta must state the date of her own birthday. She gets the idea to ask all her close people about this and write it down in one notebook. This way, she will definitely not forget the most important days of the year when you need to congratulate your relatives and give them nice gifts. On such days, a hat is a must-have. It adds the right mood to the holiday. Trying to open the door of the room, she suddenly realizes that it has become too heavy. However, it soon becomes clear that today, everything on the estate has changed, especially for Nausea. Seeing the young lady, the servants rush to congratulate the girl on her birthday, having prepared gifts in advance. One might expect something similar, but in reality, everything looks even more solemn. They really went the extra mile by ordering a huge birthday cake from a renowned pastry chef. The Duke suggests taking a closer look at the cake. His daughter will probably be interested. Without thinking twice, she quickly climbs the steep stairs, as if the illness had disappeared somewhere. The inscriptions are made with a special confectionery pen, where chocolate is used instead of paste. If you look at the wishes for too long, you want to lick all the lines at once. True, some of them are so sincere that Nausea could read them every day. The chef suggests leaving it to him. He is able to quickly cut the cake into even pieces. Suddenly, Nausea declares that such beauty cannot be eaten or cut into separate pieces. She asks to leave this cake so that it stands in the center of the hall and decorates the celebration. Coming closer, the Duke asks to explain what the tears on the sweet little girl's face are connected with. Nausea didn't want to cry at all, most likely. Tears just started flowing from her eyes because of strong emotions. Having thanked her dad for a wonderful holiday, she asks him not to pay attention to his strange behavior. Perhaps deep down, Ethan understands this child because their early childhoods are very similar. But as long as he is around, what she experienced in her former family will never happen again in her life. By the way, from this moment the gift-giving officially begins and everyone wants to be the first. The Duke's staff had been preparing for the birthday long before they started dating the lady. Now the girl really has a hard time deciding which gift to open first. Having chosen a gift, she asks to open for her the bag that is located above all the others. Of course, there is only one person who knows well about Nausea's favorite hobby. The black stones sparkle so brightly, as if they had been processed in a special workshop. Pretending to be surprised, she asks to answer who was able to prepare such a wonderful gift. Frey modestly admits that it was he who gave him the black stones from the Misty Sea. A second later, she loudly thanks him for the valuable gift that Nausea had long dreamed of receiving. The servants' expressions instantly changed when they saw the boy's magical eye. The child was always quite cute, but in times of thick fog, one must be extremely careful. Despite the anxiety, the two of them seemed too sweet to separate the children. Nausea also liked the other gifts. They were perfect for hugs before bed. The military department has prepared a training sword decorated with precious stones for the lady. Rose is confident that the research lab's large encyclopedia is much more useful than the sword. The medical department has prepared a sweet syrup that makes any medicine tasty. All the gifts were absolutely wonderful, and it was hard to choose the best one. Delfiro is a little unhappy that Nicole hasn't said a word about the syrup before. Only Dad, for some reason, is sure that his gift is not quite suitable for his daughter. Instead of a gift, he can simply fulfill any wish, but first Natsia wants to see him. Realizing that the girl would insist, he suddenly declared that he had lost the gift. Looking into the past through Edmund's eyes, she sees the form of a giant porcupine. It's hard to understand what happened there, but for some reason the porcupine stopped being a holiday gift. Azelta advises to start cutting the cake, since she copied all the inscriptions into a journal. If necessary, you can order exactly the same cake and put your wishes back on it. It turned out that the girl was wrong to refuse to cut the treat, because the cake seemed to melt in her mouth. This is truly the best birthday of her life, and one she will remember forever. Still, the market for merchandise featuring forest animal characters never took off, even though the figures were quite cute. Until recently, Ethan hired artisans from the best workshops, guaranteeing high pay. Life in the lands with thick fog was quite dangerous, but some masters chose to take the risk. If Ethan really does provide rare fabric for the rest of his life, it's worth a try. Thus, the young master decides to leave his previous place and go to the ducal estate. Once he passes a full background check, this guy will officially become a personal master. The guard warns that the only way to recognize each other in the fog is by a code word. No matter how many monsters there are, it is important to always remain alert and not give in to panic. At the most dangerous moment, you just have to say something about the flying squirrel, and then others will understand. For some reason, it was the flying squirrel that became the symbol that has long been recognized on the estate. A slightly odd choice of code word, but that was exactly what the young lady had ordered. The master does not yet realize that in addition to this oddity, he will have to learn many others. Meanwhile, in one of the bars, there is a strange gentleman who has attracted the attention of the visitors. He has been sitting like this for 5 hours now, as if he doesn't intend to leave the establishment until closing time. He looks quite dangerous. Even the establishment's guards don't dare get too close. Sometimes you can pay for any wrong move with your own life. After being here for some time, the stranger suddenly gets up from his seat and heads towards the exit. A minute later, he finds himself on the stairs leading to the top floor of the building. Making sure no one is watching him, he quickly walks to the end of the corridor. Having opened the last room, the raven seemed to be waiting for his visit in advance. The note was delivered especially for the gentleman, although pigeons are usually used to deliver messages. But this bird is special. It serves its master all its life. Having released the bird, he decides to begin his little performance, which the lady will surely like. They say Natsia's birthday celebrations will last a month, which means Cassian still has time. He has long understood that the girl is not an ordinary person and has long been familiar with magic. Natsia did not even touch the crystal that night, but it was properly preserved. Cassian intends to find out who this strange girl is who has taken up residence on his negligent brother's estate. If she wasn't going to touch the stone, he would find another way to understand her mana. By that time, the maid meets the young mistress in a rather unusual state. Everything was great, but yesterday Natsia overate a little and now things are not going well. Moreover, she cried so much from the happiness that had befallen her that she woke up with swollen eyes. The Duke promised to organize an even more grandiose celebration next year. It's nice to receive such promises, although this year everything turned out as well as possible. At this time, the baby liked to sleep a little, but now she decides to go for a walk as soon as possible. Nadia longs to finally enjoy her life, forgetting about her too weak heart. It's a pity, but my health still doesn't allow me to do everything I want and I need to conserve my strength a little. She explains that it is not a matter of illness at all, because yesterday the girl ran too much. If Azelta agrees to give you a light massage, it will help you recover quickly. The maid probably realized the young lady's trick, but she did not upset the poor girl. She had already been through too much to meet Dr. Delfiro again. After giving the baby a massage, she advises her not to get out of bed so that her strength after jumping will return to normal. Because of the child's body, the mana continues to grow, as if it were bubbling somewhere deep inside. However, one should not disclose symptoms of illness unless Natsia wants to be banned from going for walks. Unfortunately, Azelta still asks to call the family doctor into the room right now. She was even more cunning by not telling my lady that she had noticed the symptoms. Of course, the doctor comes running immediately upon hearing the news about pain in the heart area. This resembles a chronic condition, but a detailed examination is needed to confirm. Suddenly, the doctor starts acting again as if this was some kind of child's play. Promising not to hurt, Dr. Delfiro begins to listen to the heartbeat. As always, she just needs to stay calm and breathe deeply until it's completely finished. At some point, Nazia's heart stops beating as fast as it had been a couple of minutes ago. He wants to understand if she felt any tightness in her chest or other similar sensations. She appears to have a slight inflammation of the heart, judging by some of the signs. There is no need to worry about this. The doctor will prescribe the necessary medications, and the inflammation will soon go away. Besides, that same syrup Nicole gave me will make these medicines much tastier. Having said these words, the doctor begins to quickly prepare the medicine, slightly spoiling everyone's mood. It's a shame, but Nazia lost control of her mana for just a second, which was enough to detect the disease. If he can detect something like that even without knowing about mana, he needs to be even more careful than usual. By the way, the syrup is really very tasty. You don't even need to wash it down with water. The doctor announces that a detailed examination should be carried out immediately after taking the medication. Just recently, news spread through the mansion that the future owner would soon arrive. A maid suddenly ran into the room and loudly announced the carriage standing in front of the main gate. However, according to her, the future mistress of the estate was a young lady, and the entire staff says so. Perhaps of all the gossip that constantly swirled around the estate, this was the most incredible. From that day on, the atmosphere in the mansion changed dramatically, as if Nazia was now the priority target. Every maid considers it her duty to smile at the girl 10 times a day, although it is not difficult for her to respond in kind. It feels like sunlight has penetrated the dark earth and started to grow flowers. Dr. Delfiro thought so too, realizing that his own fate depended on the girl's health. The problem is that Nazia has been avoiding him for several days now, even if she doesn't have a bag of syringes in her hands. Perhaps the smell of medicine has been absorbed into the robe, and this is scaring the poor child. After changing into a regular suit, the situation repeats itself and the girl simply hides. Realizing that his daughter was simply afraid of doctors, the Duke suggested that he take a vacation and observe from afar. Perhaps after examination with the use of reagents, the symptoms of the old disease reappeared. From experience, Delfiro knows the importance of conducting a detailed examination and identifying the disease. But if you can't even touch a young lady's collar, it's definitely not possible to conduct a full examination. At this moment, Edmund enters the office with his younger brother, as if they had a meeting planned. However, the patient still refuses to visit him, so he may well make time for it. Frey's examination did not take much time, and soon the doctor had the first results of the examination. He claims that his condition has improved significantly, but one small injection is still worth giving. The boy admits that he noticed the doctor at the moment when he was banging his head. In response, he assures that the little lady refuses to be examined. This is very bad news. With this attitude, he simply cannot carry out an examination. But for Nazia, this is extremely important. Suddenly, he realizes that Frey is the one who can persuade her to stop avoiding doctors. Since she trusted the boy, it means he has a chance to change the situation. Perhaps this behavior of the lady is somehow connected with the secret that she told in the room. She avoids Delfiro only because she is afraid of revealing her main secret. However, he agrees to talk to her and bring her in for an examination, but only with Nazia's consent. Frey admits that if he refuses, the doctor will hardly ever be able to carry out the examination. For such words, the boy deserves to be given the biggest injection. However, his condition has indeed improved, and this is visible even without special equipment. Unlike his girlfriend, he doesn't even turn away from the injections, wanting to behave like a knight. He will probably be ashamed in front of his brother if he notices his stupid fear of doctors. Suddenly, Edmund announces that the boy does not have to follow the path of knighthood. However, he believes that right now a person has appeared in his life who needs his protection. It's amazing that at such a young age Frey thinks like an adult. It's commendable. Only Edmund knows that praise is good in childhood, while in the life of adults, something else is important. Despite the doctor's belief that knighthood was not suitable for him, the boy did not give up. His brother did the same. He also never abandoned the original plan. Perhaps it was no coincidence that Duke Ethan hired the boy into his army, seeing his fortitude and determination. That is why Frey is so proud of his older brother, trying to be like him in everything. If there is a person in your life who needs to be protected, you need to do everything in your power to protect him. Meanwhile, Nadia realizes that with this body, even just waking up is a feat. And yet, the time for heroic deeds has already come, which means it's time to get down to business. As usual, the day begins with running away from the doctor, who has set off in pursuit of the patient. Having escaped pursuit, she intends to take what she prepared here before going to bed. Finally, there is a chance to drink the juice of the magical herb. This should significantly increase your strength. If she drinks every last drop, the mana in her body will at least temporarily calm down. This is especially important now, when symptoms often appear during walks. Taking a sip of the elixir, the girl immediately felt the characteristic spicy aroma of the magical components. It seems she has found a universal mana suppressor, and such plants grow everywhere. She will definitely have enough for the rest of her life, but it is better to get rid of the disease forever. Now that Nadia can properly control mana, there is no longer a need to avoid Delfiro. She decides to go for the first time to a place where a child would never be allowed during the thick fog season. Someday she will ask the good doctor for forgiveness, but for now she needs to act. Now her condition is stable and she will have plenty of time to look into the estate's sanctuary. Both magics work without problems, even if you activate flight and invisibility magic at the same time. If there is less fog with mana in the shrine, it means that someone inside is already using fog. If there had been a monster there, it would have been immediately discovered by the guards stationed near the shore. This means that somewhere near her there must be a person who is familiar with the properties of fog. Almost there, she suddenly sees Frey, who for some reason went into the forest. This is the most unexpected meeting before. She could not even imagine that the boy was so brave. Another piece of news is that Frey noticed her in the fog, even though she was using invisibility magic. Frey admits that he often trains in this place, hoping to one day become a knight. He's not sure he can master the sword to the level of his older brother, but he'll do his best. In response, Nadia assures that she will wait for the day when the boy can become her bodyguard. The truth is that Frey himself is looking forward to this day more than his own birthday. However, she also went out for a walk alone, which is quite a brave act on the part of the lady. This question has long been answered, but some things are quite difficult to explain. Nadia decides to share with him one secret that no one in the whole world knows. At the same time, the maid prepares for bed, but before that she should make her rounds of the house. She did a good job today, and Duke Ethan will certainly be pleased with everything. Putting off the remaining business until tomorrow, Azelta heads to the mistress's room. As expected, the guards perform their duty faithfully, never leaving their post near the chambers for a minute. There is no doubt that with such security, the little lady in this house is in no danger. However, upon entering the room, the maid stops abruptly, realizing that something is clearly wrong in the room. The bed is made so neatly as if Nadia had decided to leave the house forever, tidying up the room. The girl demands that the chief knight be contacted immediately, reporting the disappearance of the young lady. This news shook the whole house. Now it's unlikely that anyone will be able to sleep peacefully. While in the Duke's office, she quickly reports that no signs of battle or monster penetration were found. There is a high probability that the girl went out alone on the street again, as happened last time. She could leave the estate unnoticed through the back gate, which is sometimes left unguarded. Meanwhile, Nadia is preparing to let the boy into a place that is usually off-limits to outsiders. The sanctuary contains the entire history of her new family, and now he will be able to see it with his own eyes. Besides, she intends to find out something very important, and it is better not to dissuade her. Of course, only Nadia is the mistress of this place, although Freya is a little scared. She might need a magical eye to easily penetrate the thick fog. Having overtaken her friend, Frey decides to go forward in case monsters and other dangers appear. It seems he really decided to become a real knight, starting to act much more boldly. His lordship could easily enter through the door without the help of vines or special magic. Almost all mechanisms inside the sanctuary run on mana energy if there is a mage inside. By absorbing the user's mana, everything around begins to glow with a bright pink light. The boy clearly remembers that a minute ago when they entered inside, it was pitch dark here. Everything in the shrine seems to be overly sensitive to mana. Looking at this real miracle, Frey admires the beautiful shade that she sees for the first time. This light reminds him of someone very dear to him who once came into the boy's dark life. By the way, Nazia's hair has the same shade, as if she had lit up the light everywhere. Quickly changing the subject, she suggests going downstairs, where the family heirlooms warehouse is located. However, when we went downstairs, we found only an empty hall, contrary to Edmund's assurances. There was something else in the center of the hall that Frey's older brother definitely hadn't told him about. Strange objects were laid out on the altar, reminiscent of rare museum exhibits. Above the altar, they see blue smoke that is billowing through the air in bright plumes of smoke. Without thinking twice, the girl grabs the first object in her hands, not caring what kind of mana it is imbued with. Frey warns that this could be too dangerous, as the previous owner could have been a dangerous villain. However, there is no need to worry so much, because if it were dangerous, Edmund would have removed the objects long ago. Since everything here is so clean, it means that the things left on the altar were used quite recently. Mages leave a trace of mana with every step they take, but this was the only place where it could be felt. After examining the item more closely, the boy believes that no one has used it recently. Just in case, he decides to open the lid himself, taking on all possible risks. After all, even if there was something dangerous inside, Nazia would still be safe. It's a pity, but after opening the lid, nothing changes, as if it were an ordinary thing. Something completely different happens with the feather, as a soft blue glow continues to emanate from somewhere within. It looks like this place doesn't look too dangerous, and some items can be taken back to the mansion. Nazia takes traces of mana with her so she can then calmly study it in the laboratory. It has been only a short time since they arrived here, which means no one will know about the visit. Once they are in the house, the girl intends to simply go to bed, as if she had been in the room all night. Quite a clever plan, except that they had already been discovered. Noticing nothing, she advises Frey to quickly return to the military department, where Edmund is currently staying. She's right, the military department really isn't that far away, but first they have to meet someone. While the children were wandering around the forbidden place, the owner of the place had been waiting for them outside for a long time. The Duke raised the whole mansion to the brink of panic to find the children who had run away from home in the middle of the night. It turns out that even when Nazia is sleeping in bed, many people continue to worry about her. It turns out that the disappearance was noticed as soon as they left the estate. It is worth explaining why the children needed to go to a sanctuary that is closed to outsiders. She can't even imagine what Ethan had to go through while he was looking for the two fugitives. During periods of thick fog, monsters roam everywhere, capable of attacking at any moment. Instead of making excuses, Nazia remembers her wish, which she can make. For her birthday, her dad himself promised to fulfill any wish that came to her mind. The wish is that no one is punished for today's escape and that everything is simply forgotten. As he promised, Ethan is ready to fulfill it, and besides, in these lands she is completely free. The entire estate will one day belong only to her, which means he has no right to punish her. In other words, there is nothing here that will make the girl afraid or shy. Each of the servants knows this perfectly well, so the entire territory is open to visitors without exception. Nazia hears this confession for the first time, although the Duke had previously asked his daughter to make herself at home. And yet Nazia wants to make sure that no knight receives a reprimand or other punishment from their father. From the very beginning, she planned to go secretly, forcing Frey to become her personal knight for a while. Hearing these words, Edmund promises not to punish his brother too severely, if the lady so wishes. Once alone, he already told the boy that training and the desire to become a knight were encouraged. If Frey ever faced a choice, he would protect the young lady even at the cost of his own life. It sounds much easier in words, but in reality, sometimes you have to step over your fear. He must understand what it means to be a real knight and how to act in times of danger. Since then, Frey seems to look at the world anew, trying to understand the true meaning of these words. According to my brother, a true knight must be not only strong, but also a very brave man. First of all, one must not lose sight of the lady's safety by being distracted by the glances of strangers. Instead of standing nearby, it is better to monitor everything that happens around the place of regular walks. This can be useful in an emergency situation when every moment counts. Following his brother's advice, one day Frey notices a bird that has never been in this place. He had indeed seen many birds in these parts, but this black creature was flying here for the first time. Another strange thing is that something resembling a message is attached to the neck of the feathered stranger. The use of a carrier bird is not so strange, but what was the coat of arms engraved on the message? After the escape incident, the servants began to watch Nadia even more closely than before. Edmund asks to warn in advance the next time the lady is going to go outside the gate. It must be said that they are overly attentive to her safety, which is starting to get in the way a little. The girl decides to look through some materials that she recently received from the research laboratory. By the way, you can try using the ink you took with you from the sanctuary. Surely they must have some special property that ordinary ink does not have. Perhaps the item's former owner was swirling around her right now as weightless mana. If he is a descendant of Duke Ethan, then that means he is related to her. Wanting to find out everything quickly, Nadia uses the accumulated mana, illuminating the entire room. As she had expected, the spirit of the former owner seemed to appear out of thin air right before her eyes. For many years, no one has awakened this spirit, and today the day has come to return to Earth again. Nadia quickly states her name in hopes of hearing the name of the former owner. She warns that she is not his blood relative, but Duke Ethan adopted her. It's strange, but the spirit asks to speak with respect, otherwise he will end this conversation. Before introducing himself, he intends to clarify one very important detail. In the era when the spirit lived, somewhere at the beginning of the Imperial era, magic was not yet under such a strict ban. In response, Nadia assures that she has read quite a lot of books and is well acquainted with the history of the Empire. If she is right, this man is already more than 300 years old, or rather, the spirit that remains here is. Madeline is the name that Nadia is allowed to use to address the spirit of the deceased. If he had had bad intentions, he would have attacked the victim long ago, leaving her no chance. However, instead, the spirit continues to speak as if he truly saw his relative in the girl. He understands that the mansion's magic is working properly, since no monsters have yet penetrated here. Duke Ethan's bloodline runs with magic that rejects any form of mana. If this is so, it means that the ducal family possessed anti-mana, since this is the only way to explain it. Even in Nadia's past life, there were those who used anti-mana for various purposes. The trouble is that such people live only until they are 40 years old, carefully monitoring their health. After hearing this strange theory, Madeline is sure that it is a fiction and that such a thing does not exist in reality. Meanwhile, the girl deceives her father too often, and the spirits of the family are watching over her from heaven. Of course, there is no need to be so despondent, but Nadia needs to get on the path to correction as soon as possible. As long as she does not cause serious harm to the family, the spirits will not disturb her. After thinking for a bit, he suddenly admits that he is even glad to meet his relative's adopted daughter. However, if Nadia is caught using unauthorized magic again, even her father won't be able to help. Nadia asks to stop her threats. She only used invisibility a little. In other words, this child had never used large-scale magic. Then there is another magician on this earth who is able to arrange something similar. He knows that the most powerful magic was used at least twice, and other spirits can confirm this. At this moment, Nadia realizes that there are other guests here besides the spirit. She was so excited that she spoke so loudly that she attracted the attention of her personal maid. Nadia asks not to worry because today she simply decided to get up a little earlier. Fortunately, Madeline remained invisible to ordinary people, and only Nadia could communicate with him. Having asked for breakfast, the girl quickly sends the maid out of the room. Lately, Azelta has been acting too suspiciously, always hanging around the children's room. However, he never answered why Madeline had been sleeping in the sanctuary all this time without going to heaven. To answer this question, the spirit decides to explain some facts about the ducal family. They were once a famous family of magicians, but in the modern world, no one remembers anything like that. However, right now she sees one of the progenitors of the entire family, because Madeline stood at the very origins. It turns out that this magician is the founder of the entire family, and therefore must stay here forever. Meanwhile, breakfast is already ready for the little lady. Azelta asks to eat before the food gets cold. If she wants, the maid can invite Frey into the room he is just combing his hair. In any case, she planned to work with one material, and she couldn't do it without Frey. Just in case, Nadia tells me to hide in the feather again. This is necessary for additional camouflage. Frey arrived a little late, as the spirit did not have time to hide in the object. He'll probably be interested to know the name of his new friend and why Natsia decided to acquire a spirit. He immediately calls for help, believing that a stranger has entered the young lady's room. Madeline is glad that such unusual mana is inherent not only to Natsia, but to him as well. He advises the boy to keep quiet about what he saw, otherwise the lady might get into trouble. It took some time to explain to him what was going on. The item found in the sanctuary was indeed quite unusual. After hearing all this, he still claims that he has never heard the name of the spirit. Frey carefully studied the ducal family's genealogy, but there is not a single representative named Madeline in it. Soon my brother will return from the Misty Sea. He will be able to clarify this matter better. It must be said that the boy has a rather complex character at his age. One needs to be more polite to elders. However, those eyes speak volumes. He really is very similar to his ancestors. For the first time in a long time, two children with great gifts meet in the same era. The spirit asks them to take into account that there is much more incomprehensible in this world than they imagine. And since he ended up here, it was worth proving the theory with his own example. Taking off her glove, Madeline reveals something that will surely make the boy believe. The coat of arms of the ducal family still remains on the hand of a man who died 300 years ago. The engraving is made using a special mana that will never wear off from your wrist. Only now does Frey realize that all the reproaches against the spirit are meaningless. He was glad that children today were so smart, but he wasn't ready to take the test. The boy suddenly decides that Madeline must have relatives in the remaining objects. If necessary, Natsia can go to the sanctuary again to find out. It is enough to take another look at old things to understand whether the souls of ancestors are stored in them. After this, the girl became much more interested in the ducal family. Her father's genealogy fascinates her so much that they spend their entire days doing nothing but research. Judging by his appearance, Madeline had not slept for a whole week before painting the portrait. He admits that he doesn't like this portrait either, but with his work, anyone would look like this. However, the main news was that during his life on Earth, the spirit became an exile. This fact seemed to be erased from his memory, and only now the truth is emerging again. He probably expected something similar, since it would explain the presence of the spirit in the sanctuary. Freya finds it difficult to understand for what crime this man was expelled from his own family. He admits that at the moment of their first meeting, he felt a strange energy emanating from Madeline. Perhaps he uses telepathic magic and keeps this fact a secret. In this form, he increasingly resembles his older brother, who also always remains vigilant. Seriously speaking, telepathy is a very powerful and complex form of magic. After their gazes meet, Natsia's memories flow into her head. She sees the same carrier bird that Frey noticed during his rounds. The coat of arms turned out to be a magical symbol that was used during Natsia's past life. She realizes that he has stumbled upon the best clue that will soon lead them to the truth. Luckily, the boy remembers well the place from which the messenger bird flew out with the message. It was in that place that he met a man who was familiar to every resident of the estate. Ever since Duke Ethan officially became the family representative, he has become too tense. Few people know, but the tension was connected to one young 5-year-old girl. The Duke tried to please his daughter, spending a lot of time on preparations. After a short time, the maid asks for an audience. This concerns the young mistress. She is in a hurry to share the great news the girl has expressed a desire to have lunch with her dad. It's hard to remember the last time Natsia suggested something like this, but the maid is telling the truth. It is not known what such an unexpected invitation means, but he needs to prepare properly. At her age, he was busy with his own survival, but the little girl will not repeat that path. However, while her condition is unstable, even the doctor will not allow her to leave the estate. If this is too much trouble for the Duke, the maid may mention it to the lady. In response, he orders that nothing be cancelled and that the cooks should prepare something that is not harmful to Natsia. Thus, she is one step closer to solving her main secret. Natsia hurries to meet her father, wanting to once again study his behavior during lunch. Opening the doors to the living room, she asks not to turn a simple dinner into a formal ceremony. The truth is that Ethan doesn't have lunch with his daughter every day at her personal request. As she requested, Dad removed anyone who could disturb them and distract them from an interesting conversation. The strange thing is that he takes everything too seriously, as if there were some problems. Since she expressed a desire to have lunch together, he ordered something special to be prepared. As usual, the chef did his best, having managed to study all the preferences of the young lady. Whenever he cooks something really cute, you just want to admire the look of the dish. The steak can sit quietly for a while to look nice, while Natsia gets busy with the side dish. At this point, the Duke takes the food. Does he really want to eat steak that badly? He decides to carefully cut it himself and serve it to his daughter as a ready-made dish. It took less than a minute to cut the large piece into very manageable pieces. It is clear from his appearance that the Duke is trying to look after the child in a way that he has never been looked after before. However, she feels that Ethan must have had a reason for cutting the steak this way. After sitting in silence for a while, she asks directly about what has happened in the mansion recently. She speaks of this as if she already knows the latest news from the estate. Natsia wanted to talk to Frey about that man, but then Frey left too early. The boy told a story about a gentleman who launched a messenger bird from the West Wing. Ethan insists that he gave no such orders, which means someone is secretly sending information. And yet, she shouldn't worry, because all the secret information is safely hidden. The Duke promises that every member of the family, including the estate's employees, is completely safe. She can count on his support, feeling as if she is behind a stone wall. After these words, the girl declares that she always believed him, and especially when her father fulfilled her wish. Moreover, if she is interested in information about the fog, the Duke will contact the research laboratory. Only this time he asks not to run out the gate, waiting until late at night. As Ethan had promised, she would soon learn much more than she and Frey had learned. Of course, the personal pastry chef was already aware that the Duke and his daughter liked flying squirrels. Ethan wanted to give the cookies after lunch, but due to the heavy workload, he completely forgot. He really did a lot for the comfort and safety of his adopted daughter. Recently, the assistant compiled a list of all the knights patrolling the Western Corridor. At the same time, confirmation was received after Frey's testimony regarding the bird. In the end, all paths led to one point, where he intends to solve this puzzle soon. There is only one place in the West Wing from which you can launch a carrier bird. Since childhood, the Duke was charged with the duty of protecting the estate from monsters. Mom was sure the fog would never be able to penetrate inside, but they had to remain vigilant. She bequeathed to protect those who have sworn allegiance to their family and walk side by side with the ducal family. To fulfill these words, he renounced his title and went to live in the fortress. It was Edmund who took on the role of chief guard and walked side by side with Duke Ethan. However, he could not hide the third-floor terrace, which his mother loved most. The criminal's name is too obvious. The only question is what he plans to do this time. Of course, Cassian was the only suspect who could have sent the messages. Since childhood, Cassian had been the one closest to the Misty Sea. It was for this reason that he lost his father's trust, which ultimately led to his expulsion from the estate. Having an enemy outside helps keep the knights in fighting spirit, but now there's this child. Under the pretext of kinship, he can easily approach her, taking revenge for all past grievances. The Duke intends to protect her at any cost from this man and anything that could harm his daughter. It will become a stronger shield that will forever protect her peace. Like any father, the Duke wants his daughter to become a free, strong, and independent girl. Perhaps one day this will happen, but for this to happen, a very serious problem must be solved. As night falls, Natsia suddenly realizes that time flies too quickly in this world. It seemed as if she had only blinked once, and the sky was already covered in blackness. Azelta explains that the older a person gets, the faster time passes. In life, you need to do something useful, then life itself will seem productive. When she grows up, the young lady will inherit the family title and rule the estate in place of Ethan. If you think about it, it's more like a lifelong job, so it's better to stay a child forever. She doesn't want to be a duchess, preferring to bear the title of little princess. Even after reaching Azelta's age, she decides to remain an ordinary lady and not marry the prince. In her opinion, the Pope should also be a duke as usual, managing his family estate. In this case, the maid advises him to help him with all his might, because without someone's help, he will not be able to cope. For now, all she needs to do is sleep and grow up to be a strong, healthy girl. With these words, the girl leaves the room, leaving the little lady alone. However, after the spirit awakens, she will not be able to remain alone for too long. Madeline hopes that this latest piece of evidence has dispelled Frey's last doubts. However, for the boy, he became even more suspicious than at the moment of their first meeting. In any case, the spirit wanted to tell her something before any of the servants entered the room. The question is why this man was expelled from the ducal family during his earthly life. The one who first declared a ban on the use of magical power was Emperor Million. This was tantamount to declaring that he wanted to wipe the entire ducal family off the face of the earth. It was known to all that in the blood of this ancient family flowed a powerful magical blood, different from all others. They had to make a choice. They couldn't allow the family to be dealt with so easily. By a common decision, the family excommunicated the most powerful magician, who was Madeline, from the family. By developing magic that repels mana, he was able to turn the rest of the family into ordinary people. After hearing the story, the girl could not hold back her tears because the talented magician was simply thrown out of the family. He asks not to grieve because this story happened 300 years ago and is not worth regretting. But when he met the man for the first time in a long time, he seemed to understand something very important. At this moment, the soft toy rises into the air at the behest of the ancient spirit. If the maid saw a flying squirrel, she would have to spend a long time explaining why it flies. Madeline then guides the toy into her hands, doing it as accurately as possible. Soft toys have always been children's best friends, so it's no wonder Natsia has so many of them. There is no doubt that the words about the best magician of the family were the pure truth. He is truly very talented. Madeline becomes the first person to whom she decides to confess her transformation. This news makes you think, because even with his strength, he couldn't figure it out. Princesses with such mana are definitely not found in this world, which is probably why the spirit did not notice her. The girl asks him to avoid any hints of bad mana, otherwise he will follow him back to the sanctuary again. Madeline advises to talk about the main thing, because Frey never saw the face of the bird's owner. Of course, you can recognize him by the remaining mana, but it is not so easy to do. He explains that mana is not stored in the body, but instead simply floats in the air. Therefore, magic is highly dependent on the environment, and this land is saturated with strong mana. In truth, this is the main reason why the ducal family was so powerful. Every member of the family could freely use magic. It was part of everyday life. Duke Ethan's line was considered the greatest magical line, unrivaled in the entire empire. But that era is a thing of the past, and magic has become a real curse for the family. It was at this moment that a little girl appeared, whom Ethan suddenly decided to adopt. Initially, Madeline had no right to interfere in this world, but life became truly interesting. If a banished villain decides to stand in the way of a young, weak girl, the spirit simply cannot close its eyes. Madeline swears on her seal that he will forever stand by her side, even if the whole world turns against him. At that moment, Nadia realized that a second ago this spirit had made a real contract with her. It turns out that the Duke truly recognized her as his daughter, otherwise the spirit would not have taken this step. Now all that remains is to erase the traces of magic, then no one will know about their meeting. Madeline knows that there are still those in the world who can see magic and that they should be on guard. 300 years later, he is no longer the most powerful magician he was in his youth. At that moment, Edmund's loud voice is heard outside the door for some reason. He had come in the middle of the night. Having a magical eye, he can easily recognize